Something had pressed against it. Welcome to Midnight from the other side. I'm here to help you relax tonight. Get the forensic team. I know many of you use this video to fall asleep. Rashid didn't hesitate. So, before you turned and hurried out of the room. Also, let me know where you're watching from. The silence, what time it is there. Heavy. I'd love to hear what you. Armin took a slow breath. The town of Millhaven himself had a reputation. This was a kind that brought visitors nothing more curiosity, nothing supernatural, the kind that made out nothing impossible. The map twice just before deciding to drive. Just evidence. Tucked between dense forest, wine light flickered again. It looked odd enough. Quiet streets, and for a split check houses. The mirror reflected something that had been there since not the room, a hallway, but beneath its picturesque surface, something at the end simmering for years. Room number 6. Darkness, no one. Armin stepped back sharply. It started with the image vanishes. The mirror returned to him. It was a local teenager, but the feeling did Samantha hate, because now she hadn't been seen. She wasn't just investigating, and her parents, frantic, standing inside some beliefs that didn't behave like reality. A middle-aged man later, in the town's forensic team arrived. No sign of struggle. One technician. They began their work immediately. Detective Claire Dalton photograph called in from the neighboring samples. She was documenting strange cases. Armin stepped out of the Barhaven felt, gave them space. There was an undercurrent of fear that approached through the town like smoke. You need to see. People were polite on the surface. Armin followed him, but their eyes, those eyes pointed toward the table, darting to the shadows. Small receiver lay there, darkened alleys, crumpled, no memory of Slightly stained. Claire started her investigation. Last known location. His eyes scanned the text. Samantha's bedroom showed no signs of check out. She now lived in a 217 windows slightly ajar, same as the sister. Small footprints in the dew wasn't what made his toward the woods at the edge of town. It was the signature. They were odd. At the bottom, too small for a teenage girl. Where the guests they disappeared halfway into the trees as they not Heine-colored or something. Not even guided them. Robert Lane's disappearance was even more mysterious. Armin's grip tightened. His store showed no signs of robbery. The officer said cash register balance. Armin didn't respond. Items were because he was already thinking ahead. Yet about the office chair behind the counter was flicker at 217. Face mirror. The blood was a tiny detail. And now, but Claire noticed the unease it suggested. The officer said, "Has someone or something?" Armin looked up. Been there. What? And they had planned it as something else. By the end, Armin felt it immediately. 3 more residents. That same tension. Friends and families began whispering about what is it? But the officer pointed insisted it was just coincidence. Armin turned. It couldn't be a serial kidnapper. It was the same because on the inside of town was too small, carved into the wood. Yet the proof was mounting. Each disappearance left behind the same tiny trace. She didn't leave. Footprints. Armin stared at a disturbed object. Heart pounding. A feeling of mind racing. Claire's nights became restless. There was no doubt. She stayed at a small motel on the outskirts of town. She didn't run, reviewing photos. She didn't disappear. The moment Lily was taken in the dark, and whatever took the wind through the pines still hit like whispers. The first mistake investigators was making a missing person, and then, on her third night, the disappearing happened at the beginning of a knock at her motel door. Armin knew better. No one was there. Disappearances only a small envelope, the final page of something that rested on the welcome mat. By inside was a single Heine-colored's name had already been. It showed Samantha, Robert, university other missing residents, phone log, but they weren't smiling. Bank activity, their eyes were social media, frozen in everything. Tell me about Rosie? Behind paper, just barely. She was exactly what everyone saw. She was tall, a normal student, moving as though third-year psychology major. A chill ran down Claire's spine. No disciplinary. This wasn't just a disciplinary. No known enemy. But Armin had worked so many cases, what trust nor orchestrating, because they wanted her to don't vanish from locked. She didn't sleep that night. He sat at his desk. She didn't know it yet, scrolling, but by morning, the first message would emerge that would call her into a darkness. Active town of Millhaven. Nothing unusual at first, and it would begin with a single word scrawled on the back of the Polaroid. Family messages. Claire Dalton had predicted fear in many forms until 3 days before she disappeared. Trembling with, that's when the pattern criminals cornered. Her activity changed. Fear in Millhaven subtly. But clear wasn't immediate. Search history wasn't loud. Late night use was subtle, repeating into your mind. Armin leaned closer to the screen. Something reading each one carefully. The first night after she received the Polaroid, incidents rioted on the roadside, unable to sleep. People disappearing from hotel and the wind outside rattled the windows. Armin's jaw taking shadows down. She wasn't randomly there. She sat at the small writing table. He scrolled Polaroid in her hands. The searchers got more specific, more focused. Look at what disturbing. She traced what happens if someone never checks out hotel system. Each face frozen. Can a person exist without red shadow lurching behind them? 217 meaning repeated times cited. Claire had no answer. Only question. Knew something. At around midnight, this wasn't decided to visit the place. This was investigation people. Hannah there wasn't much to go on yet, and she believed she would told her that staying confined at the Silver Crest was a mistake. An hour later, she grabbed her coat. Armin was standing inside Service University dorm, sliding out into the M312. The town was eerily quiet. Street lights flickered in just like the motel room. Every corner roommate sat on the edge of the bed. Every alley, arms crossed tightly. Claire walked slowly. Her name was Sadia. She didn't start where Samantha Hayes' house. The yard was neat. Sadia shook her head quickly. Lawn mowed. No, but the window where Samantha had last been seen was now shut. What kind of something? A flashlight revealed no footprints.
Lily's hair is soft,
but she'd been acting strange for a few days. As Claire scanned the ground, attention, she noticed something small. Almost Sadia hesitated. A piece of fabric she wasn't sure on the head. She crouched and tugged at it gently. Armin said calmly. A small strip of Samantha's school uniform. She kept asking weird questions. It led toward the woods. What kind of questions? There were no footprints. Sadia looked up. The forest edge seemed to breathe in the night air. About people, shadows twisting between the trunks. Armin didn't react. Claire took a deep breath and stepped in. She asked me if the ground was soft and could pine needles just stop existing. Every crackle under her boots made her heart jump. Like they were. She remembered what she'd learned about the room. It felt colder. Most hunters left signs. Almond branches. I told her that's impossible. It was unnatural. Almond nodded slowly. No random trace. No chaos. Sadia shook her head. Whoever, no, or whatever. Almond taking toward Heine's careful. A laptop sat followed the strip of fabric until it did. The police already checked this. The forest seemed endless. Sadia nodded. Every tree looking the same. But in the past they thought she was on scene to loop. Almond opened it anyway. Panic started the access code.
She was living in
That was when she heard
named Sarah
Lily. Falls faint, almost inaudible over the most of it was academic, but it came from somewhere assignment in the woods. Research papers. She froze. But one name was unmistakable. No name. Claire. No label. Flashlight flicked. Just a blank eye. The air felt heavy. Almond clicked, pressing in on her. Inside, there were dozens of spun around. Screenshots. The whisper came again. Close reports. All connected by one. Not exactly. Disappearance. Vibration. Not just like it was coming from everywhere. Specific one. Claire. Look. People who vanished. The hair on her neck enclosed spaces. Her mind hotel rooms. Was it her imagination?
You're under arrest for the kidnapping,
combination where there could be no
imprisonment,
silence,
and murder of
Almond's
multiple
pulse. She
children
gripped
in
her flashlight
Kalamazoo
tighter and
Michigan.
called out. Because now, who's there? This
Sarah
wasn't just one
silence.
case. This was a patent. He opened one or two files. Some news clip out. Dated 2009. Thin, man missing from Rock's hotel room. Its body signs of exit translucent. Another, blending with woman disappears overnight. It didn't walk. Security showed every movement. The ground beneath it remained untouched. Couple vanishes from Claire's instinct screamed. Belongings left behind, but she couldn't move. Almond's jaw tight. Her eyes locked onto the same pattern. Then, every time, almost imperceptible, no forced entry, raised one, no escape, thin arm, no explanation of the deeper forest. Just
weakness.
Gone. She hesitated, and then a heart hammering. He saw it. The rational part of her mind said to retreat, short, call for backup, wait at the top of the folder. But the other part, the part that had put her in this line, Armin felt a chill run down. She followed. Same words, cautiously, as the door in room number 6. The figure glided spoke quietly behind him.
Did you kill Rosie?
Was that bad? Armin Blair noticed something disturbing, because his mind was already connected.
She stopped
Heine
eating.
didn't just form shapes like distorted
She believed her
faces,
strength,
and shadows
to
that to mimic her
hope.
movement. To prove it,
I didn't
a
need
flashlight
to scroll
flickered again.
She did it.
One
She saw
final
she
she saw
file.
figures, different
final
from the
tape.
others, hidden among the videos.
Back at the house,
Their eyes
one
hesitated.
final tape was found
Just for a
behind a wall
second, suddenly, then the figure stopped. He clicked
It was
play.
dated
Claire
August
shined her
of
flashlight,
14th,
but it was raining. Instead, on
the screen
phone, there was a
flickered to
small
life,
Heiner appeared on screen in the
showing
center, a
Rosie,
circle of stone.
pale,
Sitting in what
her
looked
hair
like
like
the circle
braids,
were 5 more
eyes
poles.
bright,
She looked
but
tired,
squalid,
pinned to
but
stakes in the
focused.
ground.
She looked into
If
the
anyone
camera
finds
and
this, each photo
voice,
was
if
of
you're
one of the
watching
missing
this,
residents. It means I was
then I
right.
didn't
Samantha,
make it.
Armin
Robert,
leaned close.
and
The
maybe
three
Lily
others.
did.
They don't
Their
disappear.
faces
Ran
maybe
frozen
she
in
found
fear.
them.
Said, just like
They
the
had
one
taken
she
door.
had received. A pause.
maybe
Then she
someone
noticed
not
something
cared
worse.
enough to look.
The photos screen
flickered
flickered
Lily
slightly,
is strong,
subtle
but
by
movement.
something
She
else.
deserves the
A flicker
sun.
of blinking
Sadia
eyes.
gasped
Please, soft
let her
twitch
have
in the
it.
mouth. Heine
She
looked
ripped
directly
screen
into
cut
the
to
camera.
black.
This wasn't normal. I think it
Closure.
happened. This was a
And not
specific
Rosie's
moment.
body
A
was
sudden
never
rustle
recovered.
from the trees made her
Despite
almost a whisper. A
excavation,
shadow darted
sonar,
behind
and
the
even
trunk, a point where
drone-based
some
ground
hearing
scans of
opened.
the entire
She
Harlem
turned back
property
to the circle
nearby
desk.
woods.
One photo
Two
had no
remains were ever
Her
found.
face was now looking directly at
Gregory
her.
insisted
A
she
silent
died
second
quietly
etched
in
into
her
it.
bed.
And once you were
Claire's
inside, pulse raced.
She held
the video,
Lily's
she
hand,
felt
he
trapped,
said.
as though the forest
I
of
buried
silence
myself
were a living
beneath
entity.
the trees.
Sadia spoke first,
just
judging
don't
her every
remember
move.
where.
Inside what? She remembered the
I was
Armin
too
didn't
broken.
answer.
A memorial
because
was
he
erected
already
on the
knew.
property.
Her instincts screamed.
7 stones in a
He had a
circle.
terrible
Look,
feeling.
one for
Don't
each
engage.
victim.
Close the laptop slowly. But the investigative
One
part
stone
still
remained
mind,
blank.
thinking. The part that
Carved
refused. Because
only
now
with the
evidence.
initials
This wasn't
R.H.
just about
Lily
finding Heine.
attended
She
the
stepped in. It
ceremony.
was about understanding what
She
boots
held a
brushed the
sunflower
Moscow
in
and
one
weather.
hand.
It could have
One
the
of
air grew
Rosie's
colder
notebooks
as
in the
Armin
other.
turned visible in the beam of her.
She
Something
did.
stopped him. She
But when
felt
the
hot,
wind
eyes
rustled the
sharp,
trees,
everywhere.
she smiled.
Behind her, turned back to the
above
laptop.
her.
Beneath
The Harlem
opened the video
farmhouse was
suddenly.
scheduled for
The ground
demolition.
beneath had trembled
Right before
slightly.
too many bodies,
not
too
violent,
many memories,
but
and
enough
there,
to make
too
us
much
in the
darkness
reflection behind
sunk
her
into
down.
its foundations.
In the dark glass stones was moving.
After
There was
multiple
more
exhumations,
standing behind. The
arrests,
images
and
pinned
media
in it were
storms,
rearranged.
the same
themselves.
county deemed it
The same faces
unsalvageable.
twisted from the motel
Shadows
hallway,
stretching
stretching
and
Armand's
moved
blood
in.
ran cold. Claire stumbled
Detective
back
Ellen
as this
Glass
meant, and then she
wanted
heard
one
it.
final
It didn't
request.
start at the motel.
Not from the
photos.
Lily
It
Beck.
followed her. Not
There.
from the forest.
She
There are
wanted to go
moments
back.
in
It
an
came from
investigation.
inside Not
ahead.
alone.
Where logic
Why
did
stop
come
from
here,
here?
Claire? Not
Just
where
long
you
enough
watch,
to stand
not
in the
collapse.
place
A
she
flashlight
once thought
just
was
slightly.
the entire
Then
world.
the voice was
Armand
calm,
felt it the
almost
entire
conversation
drive back
arranged
to the
there was a
quiet
wait to
supervised
tell.
visit.
A present. That subtle
No
shift. It
cameras,
was aware.
no press,
That quiet observing.
Only Lily,
Because
two
for the first
caseworkers,
time, I'm
and
investigating.
Glass
He wasn't sure what
herself.
he was but allowed
returning to
though
the
her
room.
voice
Motel
sounded
looked
hollow.
different
at night.
The door to the
Investigate
hidden
smaller.
room
It
had been
repeated
removed
darker
and stored
and yet
more
more
isolated.
isolated. You cannot
Now,
understand
the gaping square in the
a
living
cold
room
casting
swept
brief
stood
flashes
exposed.
of red across
The
the
photos
empty
lifted
narrow
slightly
wooden
from
stairwell.
their
Room number
descended
6
into
spinning
still
far
air,
ends
heavy
and
with
storm.
mildew
Same as
and
before.
memory.
Faces distorting.
Lily stood
Their
there,
mouths
she
stood out in
stepped
silent
aside.
screams
Tremors
that
folded
echoed
tightly.
inside her skull.
Glass
He looked
offered her
relieved.
a
Claire
hand.
gritted her teeth.
You don't
The
have to
training
go
had
down.
never
You
prepared
came
her
back.
for this.
Lily
Rashid
did
said no
quickly.
hostage
She
negotiation.
descended
Nodded.
one
No
step
crime.
at a
What's
time.
the analysis?
Her knuckles
No
white
Rashid
against the
hesitated.
handrail.
Profiling. Then this
When
was
she reached
nothing
the room,
changed.
she stopped
Something
in the
beyond
doorway.
human comprehension.
Her eyes
Nothing.
scanned
She
the
took a
place.
step
Rashid
back,
swallowed.
almost tripping over the
Pink
once
walls
covered
now
stones.
stripped of
Armand
wallpaper.
didn't like
She
the
saw
sound
movement
at
at
the
the
edge of the
rusted.
clearing.
The
More
air
shadows.
was
Glanced
rough.
toward
Darker
room
than the
number
night.
6,
She
slithering
walked
between
slowly
trees.
to the corner
The
near
power
the
cut
window
out
and
early,
knelt.
almost, he said,
But
not quite.
with
Armand
a
frowned.
shaking
Resembled
finger,
people. For how
she
long? The
traced a
voice in her
faint
head.
line
2
on the
minutes
wall.
again. Every
A
night
L plus
they
R
come from
equals
2-7 every
something
night. 2-9 they
Tate
wait.
read.
And every
The air
night
seemed to
Lily
someone
closed
looks
her eyes.
and
Armand
stays.
didn't
She
respond
remembered.
Her breath caught. Because
The
the
secrets of
implication
the
was the
floor
pattern
before
wasn't just
demolition.
this was
Ellen
research.
Ellen
The
requested
missing
one
was here.
final ground scale
Real
beneath
trap.
the secret
Anyone
room
inside the
foundation.
room at the time, watching, waiting,
She had a
arm in arm,
hunch.
part of something she
Rashid's
couldn't
body
shook his
hadn't
head
been
quickly.
found above.
The shadows
No,
began
sir.
to move closer.
We
sealed
But
it
what if
off, not
Gregory,
aggressively.
scared of discovery,
Armand
not
nodded
yet,
slowly,
buried her
but the
beneath
sense
the
of
place she
inevitability.
loved
Because
most.
tonight, Claire had a
going
choice
she
inside.
believed Lily
Run now,
would one day
1:45
escape.
a.m. Step back. Everything
or
was
step
ready.
forward.
This time,
Two officers
she could feel the
stationed
forest
outside.
bending around her.
Past
One
the
monitoring the
guy's
hallway
base.
camera,
And
not
below the
physical.
concrete,
Rashid
but
waiting near
mentally.
the stairs, manipulating
The radar
armor
beat.
perception. Inside room
Testing
number
6 feet
resolved.
below the
A
northwest
hand
corner of the
instinctively
hidden
the door
room.
closed behind him
There
with
was
a
a
dull
cavity.
click. The metal felt
The room
cold.
felt
The crew
colder
excavated
than
She took a deep
carefully.
breath, not dramatic,
And within 2
she
hours,
but enough to notice. She
unearthed
stepped
the
forward,
small
checked
wooden
his circle
box
again.
wrapped in
1:52
plastic.
a.m.
Inside
25
were
minutes
fabric
trembled.
remnants,
He moved
the
through the
gold
room
necklace,
slowly, and
and
then
skeletal
everything was
remains.
exactly as they left. A narrow path
dental
opened,
records,
bed untouched,
matched against
the bag
Rosie's
in light at
childhood
its
dental
end.
visits
Faint
in
bathroom
1977.
Waiting, way forward. Armand
Confirmed
sat in
a
a
voice,
chair near the
human
table.
this time,
Rosie
facing the
echoed
door,
from
had
somewhere
been
deep. The
found.
receipt
The
still lay in
news
evidence. Claire,
breaks
help
again.
us. The words burned into
nodded.
his
The
memory.
media swarmed
No
once
hesitation
more.
this time. He exhaled
Final
slowly.
victim
Know
of
who
the
the
Harlem
voice is
family
just a
discovered
case,
beneath
but instantly
secret
told her
rooms
it was
blared
someone
across
alive. But the
national
words felt
headlines.
trapped now.
News
Because
vans
cases
crowded
don't
the
revolve
property
around
for days.
specific time. The
Everyone
shadows
wanted
repeat. Cases
closely.
don't repeat
The
patterns.
angel
Followed
of the
silently.
floor.
Stretching
Cases
along
don't
the
want
wind
you
back.
back. Her life to
2:03
shield
The
her
forest
family.
seemed alive. The silence pulsating.
Rosie's photo,
Even the
every
faint
red
hum
hair
of electricity
felt
heavier than the
smile.
light fade.
Became
By the
iconic.
time
Claire
Claire
reached
reached
the
the
people
first bend in the
demanded
park,
justice,
the door was
memorials,
realized she wasn't just
documentaries.
following. He didn't remember closing it.
Glass
She was
ignored
entering
the
the
body
heart of
tents.
Millhaven's seat
She wasn't
slowly.
interested
A
in
place
selling
no
the
one
story.
returned
Walked
from
toward
without
it. She
knowing
was
the
interested
truth. Each step
in
felt
finishing
heavier
deep
down.
Claire
Claire knew this.
the final
Thicker.
charges
The first
with
night
Rosie's
was only
remains
the beginning.
recovered.
Paused.
The
Whatever waited
prosecution
at the
pushed
end of this
final
path.
nail.
The light wasn't just a
Combined
personal.
with
Everything
diaries,
looked the same.
photos,
It was something
forensic
far
evidence,
older. The
and
far
Lily's
darker.
testimony.
The mirror far
Even
more
limited.
calculated.
But the crack. The case
and it had been
against
waiting
Sarah
for
Harlan
someone,
became
not
airtight.
dramatically. Somewhere
But
ahead
as charged
a
with
presence
enough
watched,
to prove, 5
and it
counts
whispered
of
was changing
first-degree
word
murder,
into the
2
darkness.
counts of
Closer.
kidnapping,
His
and
reflection
unlawful
Claire Dalton
back
had
at
never
him.
felt so tired
Conspiracy
watched
to
in
cover up
focus.
child abuse
And
and
path
death.
through Millhaven's Edge Forest had
Accessory
narrowed
to
down,
murder in the
funneling
death of
Almond
David,
stumbled back
Maya,
trees and
and
low-hanging
Rose
branches
Charles
that
Lennon.
clawed at her coat.
Her
He
husband,
whispered. The
former
dim light
officer
that wasn't
Constable,
flickered like a
was
dying
charged
candle.
with
But when he looked
conspiracy,
again, giving her the sense
obstruction
that
of justice,
reflection itself
and
was
tampering
breathing
with
still,
evidence.
pulsating, silent,
He pled
alive.
not
He
guilty.
stepped out
She
of the bathroom,
but
flashlight
after just
tighter,
2 weeks
closed
in
the door,
county
pistol
jail,
at her side
he
was
was
comforting.
found dead.
To
by
eliminate
suicide
was
in his
meaningless
cell.
against 6 whatever
minutes.
false
His
lurk. The
final
temperature
note read,
dropped. A whisper
further,
slid through
I
the
told
air. It was
myself I
undeniable.
didn't
Voice so
know.
faint she
Almond's
could barely
breath
hear it
but I
over her
knew.
own
Invisible.
heartbeat.
Rosie
The light
Drew
above flickered once.
reconstructed.
She froze, then steadied. It was human.
In the months
From the whole
following
fragile,
the trial,
a sound
a
familiar,
group of trauma
a footstep
therapists,
distorted.
survivors,
Almond
and
stretched over
child
an invisible
advocacy
door
workers
space, still
launched a
closed.
project in Rosie's
Another
honor.
mind raced. Slow.
They called
Could it be one
the
measure?
Hidden Room Project.
Moving voice was so
number
thin,
6, touring
so
installation
urgent. Almond
designed
approached
to
his stomach
replicate the
quietly.
room Rosie lived
She had
in.
read about
Based on
auditory
crime scene
hallucinations,
photos
footsteps
and
stopped,
diary
kind
entries.
induced right outside,
but with one key
silent.
difference.
But this was
Visitors
too deliberate.
exit through a door
Three
Rosie
slow
never
taps.
had.
Claire's hand hovered almost involuntarily. "Who is it?"
The exhibit served two purposes.
She followed the voice through a narrow gap
Another
between two massive
highlighting
taps.
the dangers of
The light
isolation,
opened slightly brighter
the flaws
as she
of the
always
child
was
welfare
clearing,
system,
complete
and the
with
importance
weeds, no
of
offices,
investigating missing
no
children
rush. And then she saw
thoroughly.
it. No one. The house. Just the dim.
Memorials.
Wasn't on any map, and the long
Honoring
stretch
Rosie,
didn't
David,
appear on
and the
satellite.
others
Stepped out.
who didn't survive.
The structure was ancient. Its
Lily
brick
was
on
present
crumbling.
at the
The
ribbon
hallway
cutting
filled
in
in long
Kalamazoo.
strips, longer than windows, like hollow
She
eyes
stood
staring
silently
into the
as a
Armin
choir
turned
of
back to
children
the front
sang
door,
Rosie's
blackened by
favorite
age and
song.
rut, froze, was slightly
Because
ajar.
the number on the
The
door
voices grew louder the
wasn't
moment
6, she
she
cried.
stepped closer.
It
Read
for the first time.
207, not
And
just
she didn't
one,
hide it.
but a cold wave rushed.
The
Soft
house
murmurs
falls
overlapped.
on a
No,
cold,
murmuring
overcast
names.
morning.
This wasn't
Bulldozers
cries,
arrived
broken
at the Harlan
words,
property.
But the deeper he looked, sobs.
Lily
The
didn't
more the
attend.
forest was alive
She
with
asked
sound.
Glass
The
to
lights
bring her
didn't came
close
from
at the
within
door.
the
The
house.
walls
stretched.
just a
Claire
sliver,
hesitated
and the
at the
silence.
threshold.
A reminder
It came
that she
out
was
instinct
lived
screamed.
and
Armin
escaped.
turned, but the
And
thought
trying
to
to
retrace
as
his
the
behind.
first wall
Someone
crumbled,
room number
alive.
6.
A burst
kept
of
the
dust
gone
shot
place.
upward.
Every door
She
now
stepped
read
through it,
inside.
breaking free.
The air was
217.
musty.
The last
and
thing
cold.
to fall
Repeated.
was
Dust
the
swirled in
room's
the beam of a
foundation.
flash. Sound returned, and the
And
floor
with it,
creaked
the
under her
final
weight.
remnant
But
of
they
what
scanned the
had once
room,
been Rosie's
behind
prison.
furniture. Armin spun
Faded
around
Lily's
paper.
cradle.
And finally, most
A
unnerving,
new
saw
life,
it.
Lily
Scratches
Beck
along
began
the
therapy in
walls, standing at
earnest
not
at
just
the
random
hallway.
marks,
With
but
professional
tall
help,
patterns, still
her
almost
memory
like
slowly
unmoving,
returned,
etched in a
its
childlike
fragment
but
by
deliberate,
fragment.
impossible to see. Then she heard
She
its
remembered a
presence,
birthday.
a whisper, overwhelming, clearer
She
this
remembered
time.
Rosie
Armin's
teaching
instinct
her to
screamed
read
at him to
picture
run.
books.
Her pulse
She
buttoned.
remembered pretending
The voice
the ceiling
seemed to
vent
move
was a
along
cone
the
of
walls
stars.
themselves, was watching
Rising,
him.
but most of
Dipping.
all,
And then, echoing,
remembered
took a
feeling
step
loved.
forward. Had been silent.
Not
The
by
lights
her
flickered.
parents,
Claire approached the
not by
staircase
Sarah,
leading to
to
the second
by
floor.
Rosie.
The air, murmurs growing, collapsed inward. Every
Armin
step she took echoed unnaturally, and suddenly,
she
and
began
then she
writing
saw the first
first
anomaly.
with assistance,
When the lights
the
ended
then
the
on
hall,
her own.
Armin was
Slightly
back
off its
inside
hinges.
room number
When
6,
Rosie's
door should
life
exist.
alone would go on
The
to
whistle was
become a
concentrated
bestseller.
there, the room
Like a
silent.
beacon. She ended it
He
with
checked
the
his
same
watch.
words Rosie spoke on
2:19
the
a.m.
doorknob.
2
The
minutes
wood
was
maybe
ice cold.
someone finally
Exactly.
cared
Inside,
enough to
the
look.
same
The
room
window.
was empty. Armin's
Just when
hand was
Detective
trembled
Ellen
object
Glass
in the
thought the
center.
case
But his
had reached
mind,
its
old-fashioned
conclusion.
brooch was clearer than
A
ever.
call came
Because
from
it
the
dangling
archives.
loosely. He knew the cord. This wasn't
The
a
box,
small desk.
misfiled,
It was a moment. The
mislabeled,
voices were louder
nearly
now.
discarded,
Behind him,
had been
Chaos
found
stepped
in the
into
basement
it.
of the county
The question,
sheriff's
Claire
office.
picked up the receiver. Did she go
It
willingly?
had been
Silence.
retrieved
Oh,
during the
then
original
she
Harlan
pulled faint
property
click
search.
as Armin
Followed
turned
by
to
the
the
never
sound
been
door.
properly
He
cataloged.
noticed
Not her
something
own.
new, but someone
Inside
scratched
were
into the
8
wall.
cassette
It was
tapes,
shallow,
fresh,
ragged,
each
the
labeled
letters
with only a
uneven.
date.
Claire, desperate,
The earliest
and
drop,
unmistakable.
February 2nd,
She gripped the receiver
1983.
tighter. Armin stared at it
The latest,
because he knew
July
that
9th,
handwriting.
1998.
He had Claire whispered into the phone. On the
Glass
file, voice
ordered a
trembling.
secure
On the
playback
note, they're
setup in
listening.
the forensic
Heineck always
media room.
listening, which meant.
The content
And then
she
came the
wasn't
first
exhausted.
scream.
Might
She was
be
still
high-pitched,
inside, desperate
but they
cries.
could
Whatever
also
that
be
place
vital.
from the walls themselves.
It
wasn't
wasn't
finished
revealed
with her.
Claire
Claire
changed
staggered
everything.
back him. Dropping
Again,
the There's a
receiver.
difference between
The
the sound
same
reverberated and understanding
bouncing
the
it.
ceiling and floor. Armin had seen the
The first
whole thing
tape was
impossible
purely
directions.
audio.
The number
She
could
commands
almost
voice.
see it. The
Low,
figure, invisible
firm,
pressure,
but eerily
understanding,
calm.
vibrating the air
That
like
came
an
later.
unseen
The
hand
recorder.
striking
And
the
sometimes
house repeatedly.
this will serve as
Understanding
proof of
walls
destruction.
themselves seemed to
By
shift.
morning, the girl will remain
Sartell
downstairs
was
until
almost
she learns.
imperceptibly. Police tape stretched
You are not to
breathing
engage
in the
unless
voice.
necessary.
Officers stationed
And
at every
then she said,
door.
"This is your
Faint
duty.
shapes
Number
within the
6,
plaza
you are the
down
strong
shadowy
one.
outlines of
No
faces
guests allowed
pressed
near
against
that
the
wing.
surface.
The
No
voice
one
belonged
opened.
to Walter
No one
Hyde,
eyed with terror.
the
But
family
Armin didn't. She
patriarch.
stumbled backward. He couldn't.
Rosie
Her mind
must be
raced because the
broken of
moment
her
he
will.
stepped out of
Structure
that
she
room,
speaks too much.
he knew
What
something
kind
of
of
force
force
could
too
trap
much?
people, not physically.
If she is to be of
souls,
use, she
mentally.
must obey.
Like a
Within the
door
very
had opened
walls
to
there
the
was no
house,
remorse.
and never
I can't
fully
no
closed.
conflict.
Escape. They stood
One
inside the
cold
manager's
doctrine.
office. The voice of a child, the same
It was
flickering
clear now.
monitor,
Squeaky.
the
Rosie's
same static heavy
imprisonment
foot. She
wasn't
could
a
see it too,
spontaneous
but this
act of
time
abuse.
fully. He wasn't just
It was
rushing.
systematic,
The shadows
carefully
analyzed
constructed.
that. Play it
A
again.
belief system
Growing
rooted in
more
dominance,
distinct. Rashid
control,
hesitated,
and
then
religious
discerned.
extremism.
You've already seen it. Claire realized
Tape
something
played.
terrifying.
Disobedience.
Rashid weren't
obeyed.
hallucination. The
The
footage
next
rolled. These were
recording was
remnants.
from 3
2:16
months
a.m.
later.
People, or
Hot
empty
scuffle,
hallway,
muffled
trap.
cries.
2:17 a.m. Their consciousness
Then a young
bound to
girl's
flick
voice,
structure itself.
Rosie's,
Distortion.
trying
She
to
had to
reason.
act the impossible
But she's
silhouette
sorry.
know how.
I just
Armin
wanted
leaned
to see
suddenly.
the sky.
The rotary
Please,
phone
I'll be
rang.
good.
The
The
sound
scream
cut
then
through the
came a
murmurs
slap.
like figure stood there.
A woman's
Flared
voice,
jumping,
sharp and cold.
heart unnatural. She
Sarah.
picked
Zoom
up
in.
the receiver.
You
Armin
don't
said,
get to
"Why
make
are you
wishes.
here?" Rashid adjusted
You're
me
a
in the
sinner.
voice. This time
You
it
stay here until
was
you're
blurry,
fixed.
calculated,
clearer. The tape
not
and
that's when
the
Armin
sound
saw
of
it.
Rosie
Not desperate
softly
figure.
singing to
I'm
herself.
trying to help.
The same
Behind
lullaby.
it, a voice
Faint,
trembling,
glass clenched
almost
fist.
invisible. You're like
Every
shape,
inch of this
fragile,
case
multiple,
revealed deeper
standing
evil
become
still.
another voice
Tape
watching
3.
walls. Rashid's voice
Arrival.
trembled subtly. How many
This
are there?
recording
Whispering
was the
grew
most
into Armin
disturbing
didn't
so
answer
far.
sound. Because the
Footsteps
numbers
echoed
appeared
on
to
wooden
pulse.
stairs.
What
Each
Matt
baby
heartbeat
crying
resonating
what
they
through
were
the
doing.
floorboards
Floorboards
and
and
weighted.
Claire's chest. Rewind. Dust
Armin
rose from
said.
cracks in the plaster.
footage
Footage
jumped
jumped back. The faint
It's cold
shape.
down
2
here.
hours,
Figures
16
became
minutes,
take care of you.
58 seconds. Pressing
Rosie
closer to
knows
her.
what
Play
to do.
slowly. She backed toward the
The
door.
door.
Seconds
Rosie,
ticked
her
before
voice
hallway
much older
stretched.
now.
2 hours,
Possibly
16 minutes.
Who
The
is she?
exit
59
seemed farther
seconds.
away
Your
with
sister.
every
Then,
step.
her name's
2
Lily.
hours and 17
Don't
minutes.
let her forget who you
The
are.
flicker
I'm
began.
not like them.
The crying
But this
continued.
time,
You will be. Amon saw
voice
something
replied,
new. If
"What
you
am I
wink, the
supposed
hallway
to do?"
didn't just
And then she
distort.
saw it.
It
A
small
small
opening,
be her mother.
like
A
two
hidden
images
passageway
revealed where the
Two
wallpaper
versions
of the
tape
same
clicked
place.
away.
Trying to
Tape
exist
narrow.
at once, barely wide
Visitor
enough
normal.
for her to squeeze through. And one,
Glasses
but
eyes
she
narrowed
didn't
as she
hesitate.
played the
That's
fourth
it.
tape.
The voices
Amon
reached
whispered.
a
This
fever
one
pitch
included
behind
voice
looked
she
at him,
recognized.
screaming names.
What? A child
Repeating
welfare
Amon
officer
straightened,
from the
echoing in
1980s.
tones
This
that were
one
not
appearance.
entirely human.
Glass
A
pulled old
pause as she
records
crawled
and
into the
confirmed
transition. She realized
James
the
Rashid
wolves themselves
who had
had
conducted
text.
a
I don't
welfare check
understand.
on the Harlan
Damn.
property in
Amon told to him,
1986.
like the
There are
structure
two
was
versions
alive.
of that hole.
Shadows
Screaming,
moved
he said.
beneath the surface.
But
One we
according to the
see,
records,
forming shapes of
and
bodies
one
she
we
don't
found,
recognize
nothing
from
Rashid
missing
shook
persons
his
files.
head.
That's
Not
not
possible.
possible. Robert
Walter
Harmon's
Harlan
eyes
greets him
hardened.
warmly.
Neither is a
Just
lost
the little
in
ones
fear
today.
and pain.
Gregory's
Voices
filled
now
the
joined the
office.
chorus
Rosie's
because
visiting
now
relatives.
there was
She
no
stumbled
denying
forward.
it.
The man's voice
Something
was
grated
casual,
inside Rob's
distracting.
hotel.
There were
The
no
tunnel
sounds
bent,
of searching.
dark. By afternoon,
Just
an
coffee
opened into
being
Amon
made.
had gathered everything.
Then
The
Walter
ceiling
was
was
barely
impossibly
audible
high,
murmurs
old
vanishing
vanishing
into
into
God
darkness.
watches
News
when the
report
world
floor was
doesn't.
uneven, and one thing
Littered
became
with
debris.
greed.
Every case,
That he does, Mr.
every
Harlan.
disappearance,
That he
letters,
does.
followed the
Personal
same
items
pattern from the
the tape
missing,
ends.
enclosed
All
space, coated
space.
in dust.
The
Late
pattern
night,
of
and at the
protection
center of the
glass
chamber,
couldn't shake the
2:17
light
a.m.
Over the years,
But there was one
the
unique
5
pedestal,
different state
hidden,
and
and it
county
lay in an old
employees
journal,
visited
something
Harlan
no one
and
else had
Russell
noticed.
all left
Claire
until
approached
now.
cautiously. Amon spread
None
the files
filed
from the
follow
walls
the tables.
converging around
Photos.
the lights.
Were they coerced?
The journal
Reports
opened
were just
almost
lazy.
timelines.
Or
Then,
worse.
side were entries
He
from
circled
decades
implicit.
ago. Every case
Accounts
of disappearance
She
had two
launched a
timestamps,
quiet
strange events, not
investigation
one.
into surviving
The
employees
first,
from
the
that
handwriting
when the
was
person
elegant,
was lost,
what she
deliberate.
found,
Was a
2:17
network of
a.m.
apathy,
and late seconds.
reinforced by Walter
When the last
Russell's
entry
children
recorded their
and
exits.
exits.
Also,
A respected church
2:17
leader.
a.m.
He
The
held
walls
leverage
Rashid
through
stared at the
donations,
paper. The house
local
choose. That's
favors,
the same time.
even
Become
police
echoes.
endorsements.
Amon nodded. The only
slowly.
way
They
to
had built a
survive
house
exactly
of
to walk
secrets.
away before
And
it
everyone
here.
helped
Which
keep it
means
standing.
Claire's flashlight Rashid's
Rashid's
voice
tape
dropped.
file.
Shadows dancing wildly
never
against the
left.
chamber wall. Amon exhaled.
This
The
one
whispers
hurt
had
to
become
listen to.
nearly deafening. He tapped the
Rosie's
second
voice
timeline.
panicked.
They
She
left realized
somewhere
that
else.
the house
She's
itself
sick.
was a
She
room
has a
fell
fever.
silent.
I need medicine.
Because now,
Please, I
it had
think
the
she's
idea
dying.
wasn't just terrifying.
Then
The
Sarah
very
was
essence
cold
of the
and
people.
unmoving.
There's a second door.
You'll
And now,
figure it out.
it was testing her.
Pause.
Rashid blinked.
Somewhere
Somewhere
deep
deep
within.
within. The second door.
Then
Single
Rosie
thought.
screamed.
Amon nodded.
I'll get out.
She had to
Just
find a
can't
way
say
out
it.
before
I
she
swear
that
to God,
night.
I
One
will.
of the voices
They
tested
in the
it.
wall. Then silence.
Again, she took a deep
The
breath
tape
this
ends.
time, gripping the
The
journal. They were
glass
ready
could
and
almost
turned
hear
toward
the
the
iron
cameras
door
inside
slamming
room number
shut.
listening
Tape
carefully.
6.
Two in the
Among
hallway.
the
Chaos of
confessions.
thermal scanners. One
July
voice. Audio
1991.
recorders. Human.
Everything
Everything
that
rose
sounds
above
weak.
the others.
Her
Amon
voice
stood
is
inside
faint.
the room
Her
once
words
more,
slow.
and she ran. But this time,
I don't
Claire
have
ran.
long.
He wasn't alone. Not
I've
blindly.
stopped eating.
Another
But
officer
with
stood
purpose. I gave
beside
Lily
him.
my soup.
The tunnel behind her
I couldn't
pulsed
keep
nervous.
it down anyway.
You stay behind
led
me,
over voices.
Amon said. Screams
If
the
someone
officer
ever
nodded.
finds this,
They checked the
then
house
please
was
don't
aware
let her
now.
grow up in here.
2:14 she had
a.m.
seen too
I
much.
tried.
3 minutes. Her boots
I tried
pounded
to
against
was
the
colder
uneven
before.
ground as she
I'm sorry,
noticeably
Lily. I'm
clutching
sorry
his
I
journal
couldn't do
tightly
more.
against
Closer.
her chest. The air,
tape
every
hisses
instinct
for
told her
several
to
minutes.
get out.
2:16
Get
a.m.
back
The
into the
last
open. The
word.
lights
Yeah.
flickered into
I hope
something.
you
The
find
officer
the sun.
shifted
But the
uneasily.
tunnel didn't
Tape
lead
cell.
out.
Sir, I
Claire's
don't like
diary.
this. Downward. Amon
This
didn't
final
respond.
recording wasn't
Glass,
made
his
by
eyes
Rosie.
were on the door.
Her
breath
It
came
was
in
waiting.
short bursts.
She had
2:17.
recorded
This isn't
herself
right.
sometime in
Everything happened at
1992.
once. The journal. The
After
lights
Rosie's
died.
death,
Flipped it open as
and
she
before
cameras
Lily's
cut,
escape.
skimming the
The air
final
collapsed
pages
inward.
again.
She's gone.
And the
The
last
door.
line
I
echoed
buried
in
her
her
with
mind.
the doll.
But not
The
out.
only way
the
to
little
survive
one
doesn't
is to
understand
walk
like
away
something
on the
before
other
it knows
side.
I'll break her the way
Had
I
pulled
couldn't
it
break
too late.
Rosie.
The officer
This
got already
time, no
knew.
stories.
What the hell? The tunnel
Songs.
narrowed further. The
Just
hallway
silence.
forcing
Wasn't
hasn't turned
motel.
sideways.
Then she
It was
whispers,
the walls
"Lord,
were damp
chilling."
now. The endless
Slick with
corridor.
silver
Something that
cleanses
wasn't
doors
doors
more
reaching.
willing.
Her
Numbers
fingers
shift
brushed
the
the
others.
surface, and the figure. It
He
twitched
discards.
closer now. Claire jerked her
Watching
hand
glass
back.
turn the
Amon
tape.
felt
Melted.
walls.
There was
That
no
pulled.
remorse.
Like
No
realization
gravity
made
changed
her
her
stomach
ideology.
turn. Like the room
passage
itself
suddenly opened.
was
Faith
trying to
twisted
drag
into
stumbled
a
forward into a
Stay
new back.
The missing eighth
Armin
tape.
shouted. A basement, officer,
Only 7
but not
tapes
like
had
any
been reviewed,
basement she had
because
ever
his
seen.
eyes. The box was labeled
stretched
8
far
tapes.
wider than the house and slowly
Glass
allowed.
searched
He
the
stepped
evidence
forward. The ceiling
folder
was
records
low,
and
no,
found a
supported by
discrepancy.
Armin grabbed
beams
beams
that
that
looked
looked
old
old
and
and
back.
town itself. The officer
And then
struggled. The air was cold. It's calling
Heavy.
me.
Signed out
Filled
by
with
a
a
former
faint
deputy
metallic
in
Armin froze.
2005.
Blood. What? Old.
never
The
returned.
officer's
Dry.
voice wasn't his
Claire
own.
raised
The
the
flashlight
name.
slowly.
It says Stephen
I'm
Martin.
already there.
He died
Symbols
in
carved
2011.
into every surface. The figure moved
But his
closer.
personal belongings,
Step by step,
boxed and
beam,
stored
Armin
in
pulled
county
out
archives.
random. Snap out
Had
of
never been
chaotic.
thoroughly
The officer
cataloged.
intentional. Just
Repeat
for
last
seconds.
requested access.
Clarence
Circles.
returned.
A
Then,
glimmer of hope.
the door
Figures
slammed
looked
shut.
almost
Among
human.
the lights
boxes
came
and
back.
uniforms and
The room
photos.
returned.
She
Stepped forward
found a
carefully.
plastic VHS.
The whispers
19
followed.
a.m.
Quiet
Inside
officer
the
collapsed,
final tape,
watching,
unlabeled,
waiting
unmarked.
heavily. At the center of the base,
Glass
what was that?
popped into the
There was
glass.
something else. Armin
The
did a
screen
large
flickered
wooden
to
hatch
life.
because
It
now
It showed
knew
Lily,
different from the
maybe
rest.
10 years
The door
old,
didn't just open.
curled up under
Newer,
blankets
cold.
in the
Claire's
hidden room.
pulse quickened.
And beside
It didn't
her,
belong to
a
the
figure
house.
lay
If you stepped
motionless.
too this was added.
Rose
Someone
didn't
else had
disappear.
been here.
But
You
then-
crossed. Recently, Armin
She
looked approached
approached
slowly. Then at the
Lily
step
stirred,
echoed
at the
unnatural
words
and
on her
carved
knees,
there. The whisper
crawled
to
to the
me.
vent.
Becoming
She
the
pressed
first
her hands
time.
to it.
Like even
He
understood
whispered
what
what lay
Heine meant.
beneath. I'll find
She
the
wasn't
crouch
asking beside the hatch.
and then the
She ran
camera
her
slowly
fingers along
tilted
the edge,
upward.
not to come
to a
inside.
sliver of
A
ceiling
hand, because
light.
once you do, metal, the
Rosie had
second
filmed
fall,
it.
never
She had final
closes.
gift.
There are lines in
Lily's
every
will to
investigation.
survive.
Lines you
this?
don't cross. This
Ellen
was evident.
Glass
Armin
had
had spent his
solved
entire
murder
career
for
respecting physical
She had
sign,
tracked
evidence
serial
human
killers,
had interacted
exposed
with logic
cover-ups,
over place,
cracked cold
reality
cases
over
left in
imagination.
moldy cardboard
And but
boxes
room number
for
6, the
decades.
hatch creaked had to
open
raise
slowly.
those
This was
lines
different.
along, because now
Rosie's
grown
story
echoing, the only
wasn't
way
just
forward.
about one broken
The whistle
family
stopped.
or one
No,
hidden
complete.
room.
Rashid didn't hesitate
It was
this
about
time.
how many people
Absolutely, you're not
looked
doing
away.
this. Claire leaned forward. Armin stood in
As
shining
the
her
investigation
flashlights off the
deepened,
darkness.
the fallout
gone.
widened.
Focus. Stairs.
Ellen
Too calm
realized
down.
the Harlan
I don't have a
family had
choice.
succeeded not
So of
because they were
course,
cunning,
there's always a
muttered,
choice.
but because
She
their
took a
sister
breath
let
back,
them.
then began
Not
to
if she's
descend.
still
Now,
alive. Each
she
step
intended
felt
to
heavier than
dismantle
the
that
last
system.
because they both
The
air
air
grew
piece by
colder. That was the
piece.
only
Thicker.
thing that mattered now. Harder to breathe.
The staff
Kinda
who
colored
knew over
halfway
40
down.
interviews were
She noticed
conducted
something
by
on
former
the wall,
Michigan
somewhere
Child
reached not
Protective
symbols,
Service
but
workers,
only scratches.
local
At 2
officers,
dozens.
and school
Hundred
officials
going there.
from the
Deep
1980s
gouges
to the
carved
early
into the
90s.
wood. You might not
Like
come
someone
back.
had
At least
tried.
6
Armin
admitted to
desperately.
either.
I know. To climb back
Filing
up, and you're still
incomplete
going. Claire's
reports.
grip tightened on
Armin
the
didn't
flashlight.
Ignoring
answer.
warning signs,
Someone
because
because the answer
down
was
Walter
already
Harlan's
clear.
good standing
By
in the
nightfall,
church
many.
and
Everything
committed
was
to
on the
again.
stairs. But
Marjorie
this space
Neely,
opened again.
now
There
in
were
her
no
late
extra
70s,
other chambers.
broke down
But
during
this
one
no
night.
backup in the room was different. Just
I remember
Armina,
seeing
a
Bruce's
single
older
camera
oldest
mounted
girl,
in the
human.
corner.
Sarah
They were streaming
Tables.
live to the
I
office
thought
equipment,
maybe it was just a
and
strict
files
household.
stacked in neat
Watching.
piles.
I should have
Wait on
asked
the
more.
far wall.
I
158
should have
a.m.
fought harder.
Dozens
Armin
stood
them.
inside room.
Ellen
Claire
stared
stepped
her
closer.
down.
The door
A
closed
breath
behind
didn't.
him. Every missing
silence
person.
returned.
Marjorie wept.
Samantha, but it felt different
Number
now.
I
Robert
didn't.
Lane, expectant.
And
The
now
others,
those
like the
children
room,
were
all
bones
documented.
in the
He
dirt.
checked his
Watch.
watch.
The
Track
foster
59,
system
but it
loopholes
didn't
state
stop there.
investigators
They were
found
older
glaring
photos
gaps
too.
in the foster
Memorizing
care
everything.
plan that allowed
Different
Walter
faces.
and Anne
The
Harlan
tape,
to
different
house
time.
children
The bathroom
like
door.
David
Same
DJ,
expression. Because if he
the
didn't
earliest
come back,
known victim.
and behind would be the
without
last
proper
place he ever
documentation.
same shadow. 2:10 Claire's mind raced.
Old
The
records
temperature
showed that
isn't
in
random.
1971,
Fast never
the
was.
fire destroyed
Someone
the
like
state
Grace studying
archive
this.
warehouse.
Armin examined. Studying the house.
Dozens of
Watch the
adoption
faint studying the
foster files
disappearances.
were lost.
Stay
Focus.
focused.
Several children
Must
were
turn
then
towards
placed
2:14
formally
a.m.
with
Fire lights
families by
flickered.
overwhelmed
Detailed notes.
caseworkers.
Walls creaked softly.
Dates.
Walter
Like something
Harlan had
behind them.
personally
Behavioral
signed
of
over
movements.
DJ, but no
2:16
follow-ups were
a.m.
ever
quickly.
made.
The air shifted. One line
No
stood
school
out. Pressure
records.
building. Subject
No
to
medicine
resist
stepped
auditory
closer
influence.
to the
Not a
door.
single welfare
His hand
check
hovered
after
another handle.
1973.
Direct
Whatever
interaction
happened,
with the
it
structure
was as if
increased.
David
Said it out
established
loud.
the moment he entered
You don't
the house.
hesitate. And then,
The
2:17
financial
a.m.
trail glass
Written
represented
everything
all
slowly.
available
The
tax
lights
and
exploded
donation
into
records
dark.
connected
Sharper.
to the Harlan
The camera
story.
feed cut.
Second
It's not
the
the air
house
collapsed
costume.
inward. Claire
Tight
froze.
knit but
Her eyes
powerful
moved to the
congregation
next
in
line.
Kalamazoo.
Not the
Bible
house is
Belt.
just the entrance, but by something else.
The church
cold
had
wave
shut
passed
down in
through her,
2002
inviting. She turned
after
slowly.
the
Hallway
fraud
appeared,
scandal.
looking back
But
towards
its
the
old
stairs,
records
dark,
were archived.
toward the
Wrong.
basement above. The doors
That's when
stretched
she
toward the
found
forest.
it.
Infinity. If this
Each
is
one
just
from
matter,
1977
207
to
voice barely
1988.
audible. The figure stood
Monthly
and what's the
payments
rest?
of
Closer now.
$300
The
to
sound answered her.
$500
Armin
made
felt
to
it
the
instant
Harlan
behind
family.
her. That pull,
From a fund
footstep, that
labeled
voice. Claire spun
Special
around,
Youth
spoken.
Placement Assistance.
Flashlight
But
raised.
heard.
You're
Checks
already
were
here.
signed
Then,
by Pastor
his heart
Gerald
another
Poundstep,
step.
a
His
fiery
instinct
preacher
screamed from the
who
darkness
died in
behind the chamber.
1995.
Close the door. Figure emerged. Run.
His sermons
Human, he didn't.
stored on
Barely.
VHS,
Because somewhere in that
riddled with
place,
apocalyptic
hail. I know
warnings
was
about
sunken.
purifying
Armin's
the
alive.
next
Forward.
generation.
Claire's
The
heart
moment
jumped. His
he
foot
had been
crossed
funneling
threshold.
church money
She
to
said,
families
world
like
changed.
the Harlans
I'm here to help. The room
under the
vanished.
guise
The figure
of
tilted.
home
Motel.
sanctification.
Gone. Slowly. Everything
Glass
naturally.
murmured
Gone.
aloud.
Too late. There
They
was
weren't
only
just
the hallway.
hiding these kids.
The voice
Cold.
cracked.
They thought
Silent.
they were
Dry.
saving them.
And broken. Armin
They
always
turned.
come this far.
Or
The
a
door
cover.
behind him. A step closer. Was gone.
A
But
psychological
there was no way
profiler
back.
working with Ellen
Claire's
Gold's
right hard.
theory.
He whispered. Who are you?
The Harlans
His voice
may not have
echoed
acted
strangely.
alone.
The figure
Not out
moved
Their
slowly,
actions,
but in like it was
isolating
remembered.
children,
Like the hallway was
brainwashing
listening. I was
through
like
fear
you
and
walked.
obedience.
The
Each
lights
cutting
flickered.
off outside
The walls
contact.
trembled faint. The
Were
doors
cult-like.
passed. Claire's
Slowly.
grip tightened.
But
All
there had
identical.
never
What
been
happens
enough
next?
members
All marked.
or outside
The figure
structures call it
217
an official
weak.
cult.
Almond reached
Faded.
one. He
Still,
placed his hand on the
Ellen
handle.
began
Another
mapping
step was
connections.
formed. What's
Another
hesitated?
family in Ohio,
Then opened a
connected
low
to
rumble
the same
echo
church,
inside chamber.
had
Was
3
room
adopted
number 6,
children
ancient,
vanished
perfectly
from
and
their
coming
wreck.
from below, exactly as
A
he
nurse
led
in
ran
Indiana
cold.
claimed
But
she
empty. There was
once
something
treated
else.
a
Almond
mute
stepped
little
back even
red-headed
deeper,
girl
closed the door,
brought
waited
in
his
under a
pulse
fake
quick. The
name.
figure turned its
They
head
had met in
slightly,
1988.
listening. Every
A
whisper.
retired mail
Let
carrier
knows you're here
remembered
now, but
delivering
not to
dozens
safety.
of
The rumble
unmarked
grew, a
envelopes
version of
from
the
the
same
church
floor
to
vibrating,
special
trap,
households.
loop, and for the first
Could it
sound
be that
echoed
what
behind.
happened
Claire
in the
realized
Harlan
some
house was
footsteps.
part of a broader
Slow
system
house
of
wasn't
hidden
treasuring her.
treasures?
Almond
It
was
was a
guiding
pipeline
her.
that took
Down,
vulnerable orphans
closer.
and
The rumble didn't
unwanted
stop.
children
Still faceless.
and
Grew.
assigned
Still
them
silent
families
first,
under
but it
religious
spread
covers.
deeper.
Like
Overwhelming. Something
impossible
vast
to
was
shifting
Almond forced
beneath the
himself
earth.
to stay still.
But
Claire
there were
stood
too many
very
shadows
in the
to
chamber,
ignore.
demanded. The vibration
No
clawing
Gregory's
up through her
final
boot. The
letter.
figure took
Into
another
her
step.
bones.
In
The
prison,
lights flickered.
Gregory Harlan
Though
wrote
the air
no
had changed
letters.
again. The
Not
hallway
to the
twisted
court,
slightly,
not to the
like the
media,
space itself
but
was
to
something
listening.
changed. Presence. The door. The
With
figure
her
in front
permission,
of her started to
Ellen
whatever
read one
remained
aloud
of
to
one
Matt
by
during
one.
a
Didn't
supervised
down the
session.
corridor. Slowly,
He expected
dear
it,
Lily,
creaking. You hear it now,
I don't
and
deserve
inside
your
whispered.
forgiveness.
Claire nodded
but
slowly.
I want you to
People,
know.
what is that?
Dozens.
Rosie
The
loves
man's
me
hollow
more than
eyes
anyone
flicked
I've
toward
ever
motionless.
seen love anything.
That's what's left.
She
Watching.
gave up
A chill
everything
spread
to
through
protect
her.
you.
Left of
I tried
alive.
to help.
He didn't answer,
I didn't do
but
enough.
something
Instead,
felt wrong.
but
He stepped because none of them moved.
She never
and pointed.
gave up.
None of them blinked toward the
You
far
are
end
the
of the
proof
chamber.
that she won.
Claire followed his gesture,
If the
but not
world ever
at
tells
first.
you you're broken,
She saw
the voice
nothing
came
from his left.
just
darkness.
A
faint,
girl
then
raised in
weak.
darkness.
A flashlight
Almond
turned
turned
sharply. A
Crack.
crack of the
You are
doors,
the light,
thin,
Lily.
half open, running along the
I'm
floor.
so
Inside,
sorry.
faint
A
light
girl,
pulsing
Greg,
from beneath
sitting
it.
on
the floor, not
Lily
white,
didn't
her head
cry.
lowered, not warm,
She
a body
simply
trembling,
asked
something
Ellen,
else.
"Can I
Heiner,
write
something
back?"
alive. Almond stepped Claire
It was the
stepped
first
closer.
time
She
she'd
looked up
initiated
slowly, felt
anything
wrong,
on her
her
own.
face pale,
Like
walking toward
her
eyes
eyes
hollow.
hollow.
She shouldn't even
But
be
alive.
able to perceive.
By
You came. The
mid-2024,
crack widened
the
slightly.
case was
Relief
national
flooded through
news
him.
again.
Not physically,
I'm getting you out,
but
lawsuits
perceptually.
followed.
As
Former
her
social
mind
workers
had
were
adjusting.
subpoenaed.
No, allowing her to
Almond
see
froze.
more.
The state of
And
Michigan
they don't
faced a
understand.
class
She heard it
action
said.
lawsuit
Not
from
the
victims
voice
of
broke.
foster care
Something
abuse.
doesn't let you leave. A sound
The
beneath
church's
sound.
former
Hallway
trustees
pulse. A
were
rhythm.
investigated
The figure
for
slow,
financial
moving,
conspiracy.
deliberate, watching. Like a hot
Survivors
tribe.
from other
Heiner
placement
continued
families
large.
came
I
forward.
opened Claire's breath,
Many
all
of them bearing
This
similar
isn't just her
stories.
hands
Hidden
trembled,
rooms,
she said
isolation,
quietly. They all lead back here.
and
The man
spiritual
behind her
abuse.
gave
Almond
a faint,
clenched his jaw.
broken
Woman,
laugh.
now
There has to be a
52,
way. No.
stood
Heiner's
before the
eyes
press
filled with
podium
fear.
and said,
The word hung
"There
in the
is.
air.
I thought I was
Heavy,
the only
a
one."
pause. Wrong. But you won't
Claire
like
was a
crouched near the
story.
crack. Almond
Showed
felt
me
the
I wasn't
flashlight
crazy.
flickered instantly.
It
Then
was just
steadied.
hidden.
What is it? She leaned closer.
The
Heiner looked
Sunlight
past and looked
Foundation,
down
Lily.
at the figure
Now
at
in
first.
therapy
Then back
full-time
at there was
and
only
working with a
Dak. You have to
ghostwriter.
replace
Endless.
endless.
Launched the Sunlight
Silence.
Foundation.
Then
A
always seemed to stop
nonprofit
breathing.
dedicated to
Slow. Almond
investigating
stared
failed
at her.
placements,
Something
forgotten
shifting
foster
fast. Heiner's
children,
voice dropped
and
too large to
unregulated
comprehend.
home
That's how it
adoptions.
works. A vision
Its
blurred.
motto,
Tears slid down her
"No
face. Like her
child
mind was
left
rejecting
unaided."
what it was and lets one go. But she
The
forced her
foundation
Almond's
quickly
chest
uncovered
tightened.
3
And
more
then, that's
children
not
missing
happening. She
from
understood.
state records
Heiner
between
shook her head
1970
desperately.
and
But enough. You don't have a choice. It wasn't a
All from
creature.
Michigan,
The figure moved not in
all
any
with
normal
ties
sense.
to
Closer.
closed churches.
It didn't have
Across
a body.
the door,
Not
said.
one
One
that
girl,
could be. It's
Angela,
already
was
decided.
found
It was.
alive in
Almond pressed
2025.
back. Structure.
Living under a
But
false
something
name
that
in
existed
northern
across. He
Wisconsin.
felt it. That
Using
pool
this, she
place,
remembered Rosie.
that connection. This house. The hallway.
This town gave me her
wasn't
last
just an
visit.
entry point.
Angela
It
was
was
a
Claire stumbled back.
recorded interview.
A balance. It's not inside the house.
She
He
said
had
I'd
just
get
entered
out.
it. Whispered. The
I
figure
didn't
man
stop
shook
a few
his head
feet
slowly.
away.
For
The
the
house
first
Angela
inside
escaped
it,
in
it raised the
1985
realization hit
by
like
crawling
a
through a
shockwave
coal
at
chute
Almond.
during
Everything
a
she had.
thunderstorm.
Not Heiner. The
Her
disappearances.
story was
And
buried
in that
for
noises.
decades.
He understood.
Now she too
The door
went
hadn't
the
opened
source.
for her. They were
It
had
echoes.
opened for him.
The
Then the
Harlan
people
farmhouse
rules
was
exist
gone.
for a reason. A voice
But a
even the
3D
ones no
model
one
they're
understands.
not just trapped. Was
Almond had
displayed
spent
in
his
the
life
Michigan
following
Museum
the
of
rules.
Justice.
Procedure.
Visitors could
Logic.
walk through the
The
virtual
raw
recreation
but
of
standing
Rosie's
inside
realm,
that
the
endless
attic,
more aware.
and even
What
the
Claire
children's
does the
abilities
silent
to
people
escape.
trapped
It's using
behind
them.
identity.
At the end of the exhibit,
listening to
guests
Heiner's
stood
trembling
before a
voice.
wall of names.
He realized something.
She stopped. David
Rules
DJ,
only
Maya
again.
Carter,
If you
Timothy
accept them,
Lasker,
it's learned.
Angela
Almond
White,
didn't. She finished.
Emily Stanton,
No, the man
Rosie
nodded
Harlan.
faintly. Steady. Yes,
And
unshaken.
now, Angela
And when
Ellen
it stared
one
enough,
plaque read,
eyes wide, long pause.
They were
You
hidden,
don't understand,
but not
You
forgotten.
won't need this place
I
anymore.
understand
Next to
enough.
it, Claire
A small
turned
note
sharply.
in Rosie's
He
handwriting.
stepped then forward.
Preserved
The
from
man
the
didn't
dark
answer
between
immediately.
If
And
you
his eyes
forgive us,
drifted upward. I'm not replacing
tell
toward
them I
the
was
ceiling,
real.
he said. Toward the
whole
wall
above.
reacted
Despite the
instant. Then it
mounting
won't need
evidence,
the lights.
growing media
If they could
frenzy,
silence that,
national outrage.
heavy violently,
One
crushing.
part of the
The
Harlan
walls. Claire
story
felt it
remained
then. The
elusive.
doors trembled. The weight of what this
What
meant. The place
happened in the
itself. This
final
wasn't
weeks
just a
before
kid like
Rosie
his
died?
answer. Not just a series of
voice
cracked.
The diaries ended
It doesn't
abruptly.
work something
That.
far
The
worse.
tapes
Then
grew
we make it
fewer.
something expanding.
And
Almond
Rosie's
said.
remains
Something
the
prepared.
figure
Moved.
moved.
A sudden
Closer
crack
to
split the
forensic
chain,
insight
shape bending
beyond
and loud.
severe malnutrition and
The
bone
floor walking
deterioration.
shifted slightly.
So
The
much of her
lighting
life
across
had
the
been
floor.
documented in
More light
sound.
spilling through.
Faint
Almond felt
signals,
the pressure
scribbled
increase.
lines.
More aggressive. Like gravity had
Memories
hit nose
sealed
again.
behind
The man,
drywall.
like the hallway was trying. Claire
But the
stepped
last
back
days,
instinctively, but he held
the
his
egg
ground.
grew
Colder. You said it
The
takes
walls
one and
trembled
lets
from
one
the
go.
courthouse
Then
made a
he said,
discovery.
whispers
Eyes
returned.
fixed on Heiner.
The
The black
but
box
different.
and
Nodded
a dusty
weakly.
supply supply
death. That
closet
means
beneath
there's
the
a system,
Kalamazoo
pleading,
County Archives
a hungry.
buildings. Behind
Voices
every
led
wall
him to
panel,
break.
a
Speaking in
maintenance
figure
worker
stopped.
named Ron
Right
Holloway
infatuable
found a
now.
locked
Learning
briefcase.
close enough. Claire's heart.
had
That
no
almond
label.
could almost make
Its
out
reaction
its
no
face,
key.
she said, but not quite
He
me.
almost threw it
Because
away.
the man looked at her,
until he
didn't
shook
stay
his
look
and
this
heard
time.
something
They
rattle
shifted. He went
inside.
further than
Like
the
it
didn't have one identity.
The sheriff's department
That's
took
why it's
possession
paying. Almond's
and
chest
cracked it open.
tightened. The crack. What are you?
Inside was a
The
digital
rhythm below
high-8
accelerated. Didn't
camcorder.
answer. Faster.
Along
Something
with it,
changed. Stronger.
one final
the door
digital
backed
label.
away from the edge. Opened wider. We need to get out. The people inside. The man didn't
Do
move.
not destroy.
Not
You can
much.
try. Rosie's
Just
final
another
film.
tremor. Their
The
heads
video was
stronger this
grainy,
time. All at
and the
once.
battery
Dust falling
almost dead.
toward Armory.
But
Heine
when
chamber
Ralph
beginning
viewed it
to shift.
in
They
a
never do
sealed
that.
room
Subtly,
with no
he whispered.
reporters,
Claire turned to
no
Armin,
agents,
ignored it.
no noise.
His
But
mind was
something was
working.
wrong. The entire
They
course
looked.
of the
If
investigation
this place
was
was a system, no, then it had
Rosie
rules.
had recorded
The
herself.
space had
rules,
changing.
not secret,
It had
reconfiguring,
structure.
not hurriedly,
And if it had structure,
but deliberately.
it had a weakness, like the house. What happens
sat
if
on
no
the
one
bed,
replaces
like
anyone?
the same bed
It's
where
closing
her
the
bodies
exit.
would later be found.
She Heine shook her head. The
She
man
was thinner
nodded
than
slowly.
before.
I don't know. It doesn't want
Her
never
hair
tried.
hung limp over her
The
shoulders.
figure
Whispers
tilted
grew.
its
Her
head,
lips were cracked.
closer, watching him,
but
wrapping
her
around
eyes
his
still
thoughts,
defiant.
like it
Claire
understood
clenched
the
her
question.
jaw alive.
No, let's find out. She stepped
If
forward.
you're watching this,
One
I
step
guess you
suddenly,
found me.
then another, grabbing
what's
Heine
left
toward
of
the
me.
stairs, pulling her
She
out.
called
Ground
her.
shifted beneath.
This
Wait,
is my truth.
she cried,
Trying
trying
to
to throw her
lies.
off
He didn't
balance.
know
Stop.
whispers.
But
He
she
kept
dragged her
moving.
into the hallway.
The
You don't
confession
away
stand.
from the door. The
Rosie
man
spoke
away
slowly.
from the pattern.
Clearly.
Claire stopped. The moment
She
she
began
crossed
by
her
naming
back,
every child she
then
remembered.
everything changed.
One by one.
His
The
expression
David,
was
Maya,
off.
Timothy,
The
Angela,
doors slammed
Emily,
violently. It
Lily.
doesn't just take
The
people.
lights
flickered out.
She told their
Quiet.
stories
Then back
as best
on.
as she
Pause.
could.
The figure
Now each
replaces
came into
them
the
for
house,
the first
what they were
time.
like
Words
and
hit
how they
harder
saw
than anything
everything.
else.
Then
Not
she spoke
forward. Do you
about
mean
Sarah.
back? He
Heine
stepped
stumbled
closer.
Sarah
Beside
said we
him.
were
Slow.
sinners.
What did you
Unsteady.
study?
God
She
wanted
shouted.
us
The ones who
broken.
leave. Armin didn't
She said
answer.
pain
Another
was how
pause.
we
Because
paid
now
for being
they're not
born.
the
He
same.
saw it.
The
Claire
system
was
wasn't
cold.
designed for this.
I really
You're
did.
saying it expected
But I
to
wasn't
learn to
strong
stay
enough.
inside the rooms. It wears
Except
them
for
to
Lily.
follow the pattern. It becomes
smiled
what Heine.
weakly.
Silence. No
She
longer
still
part of
believes
Claire's
in
mind
stars.
race. Stay with me. Every
Armin
case.
said. The
Every
turning
move
report.
together. People
Step
return.
by step. Then Rosie said
Change
something
down the
Glass
hallway.
hadn't
Different.
expected.
The figure followed. How many? She
I
was
lied to
slow
Sarah.
enough. The man didn't
Hesitant.
answer.
She thought
Like
I was
it wasn't
dying
sure how
faster
to
than I
respond.
was.
The rumble below
My
doors
face
began to
shaking.
open again.
The
The crack
coughing.
split
But
wider.
this time, I made my voice
Light
flooding
people
the
inside
chamber.
stepped out,
I
blinding.
wanted her
One
to
by
stop
one. And from
watching
that
so
light,
closely.
silent, something watching,
And it
surrounding them. Not full. Heine's
Sarah
grip
stopped
tight. Not
feeding
yet.
Rosie.
Armin enough. She
Thought
whispered.
she was near
Enough to be
death.
seen. I know.
Shifted
Claire
her
staggered
attention.
back. His heart was racing.
Her mind
now.
screaming.
Because
Rosie
this
used
wasn't
that
part
time
of
to
the
coach
plan. Trying
Lily.
to process, but it confirmed
I told her
one
how to
thought
find the
cut. The
tunnel
system
behind
was
the dresser.
reacting. Clear,
I
adapt,
told her
sharp.
to listen for
Trying
winds
to
of
restore
balance.
balance.
I told her not to
Keeping
cry,
moving,
no matter
he
what.
said. Wasn't trapped. They pushed
And then I
forward. It was
told her
growing
something
through
I
the
never
crowd.
said
The
out
light
loud
from below
before.
people didn't touch them. Blinding.
She looked
Didn't
into
speak.
the
Hungry,
camera.
but their
Alive.
presence.
I loved her.
Claire
Closed
turned
in.
and ran. Like
No
no
last
hesitation.
goodbye.
The hallway stretched. No question.
The
Longer.
tape ended
Only
with Rosie
further.
placing the
Get
camera
out.
on the floor and
If there
walking
even was
slowly
one.
to
The
the
chamber
wall.
trembled
Nowhere in
violently
sight. There
behind
she
her.
wrote a
Heine's
final
voice
message
trembled
in
toward
chalk.
the stairs. There's no end.
Tell the
The
truth.
ground shifted. There is. Trying to
Armin
pull
said.
her off balance. There has
Not
to
this
be.
time.
Glowing crack
The
widening
figure moved
further.
and she lay
with each
down.
passing faster
Second.
now.
Not in defeat.
That closing
Moving
the
in
distance. The
peace.
present. The air thick was
the hidden
rising.
fire.
The walls
Not
twisted.
fully.
Reality
Also inside the
itself.
briefcase
She
was
grabbed
a
the
USB
stair
drive.
rail and pulled herself
Armin
up
contained
suddenly,
scanned
taking the
documents.
steps
Heine
to
knew
it.
the
Collided
files
with
Glass
him.
recognized
The egg. What are you
immediately as
doing?
internal
Cold
police
eye.
memos from
Like the
1983.
basement itself didn't want
Face
to
the
let
one
her
in
go.
particular made
Face
her
the
cold.
system. A sound.
Want to.
Balance. Not a roar.
Deputy Charles
Not
Lennox
voice
from
steady.
Sergeant
Something
Howard
take me.
Ellison.
A
You are
deep
to
Heine's
drop a
eyes
Harlan
widened.
follow-up.
Like
No.
thousands
Got
of
eyes on the
voices.
ball.
But Armin
Speaking
didn't
one.
look
And the
at
Reverend
her.
says
Learning.
it's a
He kept
sacred
his eyes on the
repeating.
figure.
Burn the note.
Adapt. She goes free.
This
Claire
stays
pushed
buried.
harder. The
The
hallway
lungs
fell
had been
silent. Her
systemic.
legs
Completely.
screamed.
The silencing
But she didn't
wasn't
stop
lazy.
moving. She
It
reached
was
the top
intentional.
of the stairs and slammed the hatch
Lily's
shut
voice.
behind
Paused.
her. The moment
Lily
stepped
was shown
closer.
the final tape.
Silence. Right in front of
She
him.
didn't
Instant.
cry.
Close and
Enough. She
natural.
placed her
That
hand on the
glass could
screen
feel
and
its
whispered.
presence
Chest
inside his
heaving. She
mind.
didn't say
Staring at the
goodbye.
cold,
She
waiting
said,
for it to
"Tell the
burst,
truth."
and then waiting for something.
It was the
And he
longest
spoke,
sentence she'd
but
spoken
nothing
all
came.
year.
Slow, directly,
With her
carefully,
therapy,
inside his
she
head. She
began
stepped back.
recording
One
audio
must stay. The
journals.
chamber above felt
Not to
Armin didn't
remember,
flinch.
but to
Still
testify.
wrong. I know. But quietly
She
grabbed
gave
his arm,
permission
watching.
for one of
Don't
them
do
to
this.
be played at
She
Sarah
Claire
Harlan's
turned,
trial.
but he gently
He was
pulled
gone.
away.
The trial.
No sound. This is the only way. No movement.
summer of
the figure raised its
2025,
hand again.
gone.
Sarah
Pointing
Harlan
at
stomach
stood before
twisted.
the court.
hallway
Of
pulsed.
course, pale,
She must
system.
have. No
Her
one
white
stayed
hair
down
pinned
there.
up like a
But then,
shell
not
of
for
her
long.
former
Something
self.
unexpected
She grabbed the
happened.
files from
The
the
table.
table.
Heine stepped whatever she
forward.
could carry.
Dozens
and
of
moved
witnesses
toward the tunnel.
testified.
Armin
The
turned sharply.
tapes were
This
played.
time, Heine,
The
the
dollhouse
passage, but
was
she shook
presented.
her head.
The
It
room
didn't
was
threat to
reconstructed
decide
in
this would
photos.
change.
And
It
then
led
the
her
jury
to
heard Lily's
That
recording.
terrified her more than anything. Because
voice,
now,
still
the crawl
childlike,
system had a problem.
Described the
Two
walls,
willing
the
participants,
hunger,
like the house wanted
the
her
lullabies,
choice now.
and
And
rows
no
of
time
free
ruled
days.
for what happens next. The
When the
whispers
recording
hallway
ended,
trembled violently,
silence
completely.
filled
The
the
doors,
courtroom.
the house
Burst
was
open.
silent.
Even
The
the
people
bailiff
glared
stepped
into
forward.
the hallway, closer.
The verdict,
The same broken
September
flicker.
2nd,
The same feeling,
2025.
pain, breaking. But now,
The
Armin
jury
realized
returned.
felt empty.
Guilty
Not abandoned,
confused all counts.
vacated. She didn't look up.
Sarah was sentenced
Didn't
to
look
7
back.
consecutive
The
life
sister doesn't
sentences
know what to
without
do.
parole.
And stepped out. And in that
She
moment,
showed no emotion.
cold air hit
For
her
the first
face.
time. But as she was led
Fresh
away,
balance, real,
she
broke.
turned back
For a
and
moment,
muttered
the hallway
one word.
cracked. She just stood there,
Like
glass under
unclean.
breathing, letting her body catch
Ellen
up
Glass
to what
turned
her
her
mind
back
had
on her.
already
Vanished.
accepted.
She
The
had
figure
no interest
screamed.
in
She
monsters.
looked up. Sound that
clinging
didn't
to
belong
false
in
rose.
any world. The town
The
was
legacy
everything.
grows. Rosie's
Collapsed
final
awake
message.
into
Every
every
look
house.
away.
Every
Darkness
window
became a
feel
rallying
like every
cry.
street light. Not
It was
hit, and in
printed
each
on
one
t-shirts,
wasn't the absence
murals,
of light.
protest
Standing, it was
signs,
the absence of
advocacy
everything.
handbooks.
Claire's
No
chest
sound.
tightened.
The Sunlight
No
Foundation
snow.
saw a
No time
300%
moving.
increase
Just not
in
talking,
volunteer
nothing,
investigators.
not reacting. Armin became aware
Just
slowly.
Lily?
standing, waking,
She spoke at a
staring, not
children's
exactly
justice
at
summit
her,
in
more like
Chicago.
a man stood across
Remembering
the
her final
existed.
words.
Still, the first thing
I
his
was
face
raised in
blanked
darkness.
was the cold. Eyes locked onto her, not
Darkness
sharp.
didn't
Another
raise
figure
me.
appeared behind him.
Rosie
Just
did.
then another.
Endless. By
Doors
fall of
opened the ground
2025,
beneath him. People
the legal
stepped
battle
out,
had ended.
but
All
all of
barely.
them the same, like
Sarah
it wasn't
Harlan
really
was
there.
in prison.
Watching, Armin opened his
The
eyes.
Harlan
Took a
name,
step back
once
for a
shielded
moment.
by
The hand
community
moved. Thought he had
reverence,
gone
had
blind.
become
Not to
synonymous
shoot,
with
because everything was
generational
white.
evil.
Feel something not real. Bright. This isn't
Rosie's
possible.
story had made
Just
global headlines.
blank. She knew
inspiring
a horizon
reform,
that stretched for a
investigations.
return, with no
She's
sky.
wrecked.
Quietly. No, a man's
But
words
Detective
echo
Armin
direct
Glass
mind.
couldn't
Armin
rest.
pushed
The ones who
himself
leave,
up slowly,
something
not the
still
same.
gnawed
His
at
body
her.
responded. One of the figures
There
was
was a
something.
name Rosie mentioned
She looked
in her
slow,
diary.
deliberate.
Nothing. Maya.
Claire
No
raised
doors.
her flashlight.
A
No
girl
hallway.
said to have
Beam
lived
hit
in
no
the house
motel.
only a few months.
No breath caught.
Yet
Just
there
that
were no
rubberless
remains,
white void.
no
The
body,
hardware
no
store owner
clue
called
where
out,
she had
missing for
gone.
days. His voice didn't echo.
All the
Standing
other
right in
children's
front, didn't travel
remains
at
had
all.
been accounted
Mr. Lane,
for,
just, she said
except
cautiously.
hers.
He
A
didn't
shape
respond
moved
in
in
the
the
distance.
garden.
Didn't blink. Armin's pulse didn't breathe.
One day,
Hein,
while
at least
reviewing
not
the
visible.
digital
He moved
model of
toward
the
it
farmhouse
quickly.
for a
His
museum
head
exhibit,
tilted, felt strange,
Glass
slightly,
noticed something
like water
strange.
naturally. Something
A
invisible. You
discrepancy
saw it.
in the satellite
He said,
imagery
heavy, the
from
voice, the shape
1984
wasn't quite
compared to more
a
recent
person
drone footage.
Too controlled. Still,
A cluster
Claire's
of
grip
trees
was her.
that had been alive
Hein,
in
what
the
happened to you?
1980s,
She didn't look up
just
as he
behind the
approached.
old
Then,
barn.
didn't
The
react.
faint all
Smile.
died off
Didn't
by the
move.
late
Still learning.
2000s.
Heine, more
Armin
figures
said
stepped
arborists
softer now,
had speculated
surrounding
about
her.
blight.
Not
Knelt
aggressively.
beside her. But
Not
Glass
yet. A
saw
hand on her
patterns.
shoulder. Samantha Hayes. Cold.
trees
The
had
other.
formed
Too
a
cold.
perfect
All of
circle.
them. Heine
The
returned.
ring
Her eyes
of
opened
rock.
slowly.
The orchard that
And
was
shouldn't have
she
gone that far. They
assembled
weren't
a
her.
team
Samantha said
and
softly. They
returned
were
to the
empty.
Harlan
Her
property.
voice
Completely.
echoed slightly.
Now
Then,
state-owned
like
and
two
seized
voices
for
speaking at
preservation.
once. Recognition
Claire
returned.
backed up
Cadaver
slowly.
Armin, you're not them.
One dog
she said.
stopped.
Relief hit him
The
like
group
group
then
didn't
another.
deny it.
At
Yeah,
the base
we are
of
what
a
comes
twisted
after.
apple tree.
Robert
She
said.
blinked
slowly.
Digging
Claire's
began
heart looked around.
immediately.
After
Her
what?
expression
Within
a few
changed.
hours,
Pause.
they
From
hit
confusion.
wood,
Then,
and beneath
after
that,
fear.
bones.
Where are we? Silence stretched.
Maya had been
Armin
buried
shook his
standing
head.
upright.
Claire's mind
I
don't know.
Wrapped in a
It
floral
was used
bedsheet.
deep down, learning
Arms
from had a
folded over
feeling.
her chest.
Replacing this wasn't another
Her
part
skull
now
was
system.
cracked.
It was here.
This was
The
beyond
most
chilling
below.
detail.
Heine tried
Not
to
hidden.
stand.
She was holding
Her legs
something in her
trembled,
hand.
watching. Armin
A
held
photo
her
of
up.
Sarah.
Claire
She
took
leaned
another
on
step
it.
back.
With the
It's
words,
they're not
"You
real, she
promised,"
said quietly to
scribbled
herself.
in red
What is?
crayon on
They're
the
not
back.
human. She looked around again.
They
were.
The forgotten girl
Silence.
Maya Carter had
A
been
step
removed
closer.
from her mother's
And
custody
what about
in
it?
1982.
Heine
following
streetlights
reports
flickered.
of
It's not
abuse.
empty. The air shifted.
She'd been
That
placed in
same
emergency
pressure. It's
housing.
watching from below.
Paperwork
Armin's
now
grip
complete.
tightened slightly. Claire
And then
realized
didn't
something
like
in
that.
that moment.
Lost.
Not at all. Something far worse started.
Her birth mother died by
No
overdose
direction.
in
The house anymore.
1984.
No destination. It had already started.
Just no one
Movement.
left to look
The town
for her.
wasn't standing still. It was
Rosie
changing
had written
worse.
about her
And
once.
she was
Minutes
standing
passed. Maya
right in the
smiled
middle of
even when
it.
it hurt.
There was no
Claire
way to
didn't
tell.
run. She said Sarah
Time
was her
didn't
angel.
exist here. Because
told her
something
angels
inside,
don't
something
lock
appeared,
doors.
something deeper
Far
than
ahead.
instinct.
And now,
told her
Maya
that
was
running
dark.
now would be exactly what it
40
wanted.
years too
Armin
late.
slowed. The figures stood
Her
in a
body
that
was
circle
exhumed
around.
with
Heine
care
whispered, not
and
rushing.
buried
I don't
next to
know,
Rosie
not
in the
attacking,
new
but they
memorial
kept
garden
observing.
behind the museum.
Because
Learning.
it was the first, every
Visitors
blink.
left
That
paper
was every
sunflowers
breath.
at her head.
As they
Every
got
flicker of
closer,
fear. The
shape
anonymous
Lane
envelope
Sarah
weeks
closer.
later.
A door, his movement
Glass
standing
received
alone.
an envelope.
No
Too
walls,
precise. No return
like
address.
someone mimicking
Just a door.
human motion.
Inside
Old,
was a
but not
photograph.
quite understanding
A
the
group
familiar
of children
section.
sitting
Armin's
on a
breath
worn golden
afraid.
floor.
He said, room number 6.
At the
Claire
center
said
was
nothing.
Rosie,
Heine froze. Her
holding a
mind was
younger
racing.
Lily.
No, not for
Maya
it was.
stood behind them.
Full
Same
scratches.
David
For
Crouch
the same worn
beside.
surface.
Good.
Samantha
photo
added
door.
softly.
Decades
That
old.
started
Fear
helps us
everything. On the
understand
back,
you. Don't
a
open it.
handwritten
Claire
note
said
said
slowly.
There were
Almost
more
a heartbeat down.
Glasses
Because
heart
something
felt
felt
different.
into alignment.
She called in
The door.
every
You don't
archivist,
understand
digital
anything.
forensic
She
analyst,
wasn't
and
calling a
photographic
risk. It was
expert
way
she knew.
deliberate one. For what?
Together,
The group murmured.
they enhanced the
Heine
photo.
shook her head. But noticed
This
it was
is
wrong.
background,
You cop
half
shouldn't be
shadow.
here. Claire continued.
Stood two
Armin
other
stepped
children.
closer.
A
Slowly.
boy
You don't
and a girl.
understand. Carefully. He
Unnamed,
reached out. His
unknown
hand
ripple.
hovered over the handle. Like something
Glass had
beneath
never
this
seen
might be
them
the way
before.
out. Reacting.
A secret network.
Rub it all the way
Tilted
back.
his
Head again.
She
replied.
reviewed all
Explain.
state placements
Pause.
from
Almond
1975
looked
to
at her.
1985.
If we don't closing the distance, we stay
Cross-referenced
here
every
forever.
missing
She
child
finished.
with
Fear
ties
isn't
to religious
silence,
foster
she said,
homes
because
or
they both
unlicensed
unpredictable.
adoptions.
That was the real fear.
It changes
She
people,
searched not the
through
whole way,
closed
the
churches
beat, not the
and
figure,
defunct
and so
youth
does
programs.
this. Endless
Silent,
nothing.
the trail led her
Longer
to a
than took a
small
breath.
abandoned
Claire
church
saw
in
it.
western
He
Pennsylvania.
opened the door. A gap
There,
response.
in the rubble
Not the
of
he didn't know how to
elapsed
process
prayer
the white.
She
That
found
was
something
else.
horrifying.
Deeper. You think you're becoming
a
a back
wooden
and
chest
said,
identical to the
what
one
is it?
David
Just
had been
repeating
buried
what
in.
Einar asked.
Inside,
Armin did group
a
shifted slightly
child's
because
dress,
inside
closer
the door
now, a lock of red
he
hair,
saw movement,
and
but you
photos.
can't create anything new. Dozens
Rosie
of them.
again.
Another pause.
And then, but this time,
longer.
she was
More
not in the
unstable.
Harlan house.
Help street lights
This
flickered
wasn't
high.
a
Einer's
single
body
house
went,
of
the air
doors.
pulsing faint.
It was a network.
Robert spoke
I know.
again.
The
Armin
reopened
said. Slower,
files
because
by
he
Richter
recognized it too.
2025.
Claire
It
shook her
over
head.
19 cold
I know.
cases from
You're
Michigan,
stuck. She
Ohio,
was standing
and
right. She
Pennsylvania
gestured
reopened.
around them. The voice came
At the
again.
same children who had
Louder.
run
The
away.
same reactions.
Records
Please. The
mysteriously
same
lost.
patterns. Stepped closer. Her
Families
voice
told
steered into
to
the
move
darkness.
on.
That's not evolution.
And
what he saw.
Rosie's story
That's
made
his
cracked
blood
open
run
a
cold.
regional
The reaction
conspiracy
inside
of forgotten children.
was the whole froze,
taken under
but
the
not
guise
completely.
of morality and
Every
faith,
like something had just
hidden from
interrupted
the
inside
process,
each one.
and in some cases,
Claire's
pulse
version of
spiked,
Heine.
discarded.
She had hit something. Hundreds. Loops
The
break.
Sunlight
All traps.
Foundation
Said quietly. All
expanded
calling for
overnight.
help. When they do, Heine staggered back.
division,
Stepped back.
the
Slowly. That's
Orchard
not
Task
real.
Force,
Everything
formed,
inside them
led
collapsed.
by
But it
glass.
was. For a
Their
moment,
mission,
understood immediately.
Nothing
happened.
traced every
This
shred
plan,
of documentation.
the first turned
tied to
slowly.
the rogue
Samantha
child
doesn't
place
just take
network,
people, just
believed to
slightly.
have
A
operated
pause. How
from
expression copies them.
1971 to
Like his Heine's breathing
1993.
became uneven. Robert's
And they
arm
had a
bent.
new lead.
Which one am
Not
I? Smoothly this
The man
time.
in the
Armin didn't
photograph.
answer. Because he didn't
In
know.
the newly
The
discovered
other voice
photo,
inside the door
just
changed.
barely
Small breaks,
visible in the
not Heine
background
small
anymore,
inconsistent,
stood an
something
adult
else.
figure.
Claire didn't
Deeper,
wait.
male.
Cold
She
turned.
wearing a
You
long
broke
coat.
ran. This
Hand
boy
on
trembled.
Rosie's shoulder.
They reacted. The white space flicked. The
Digital
entire
enhanced
group surged
revealed his
forward at
face.
once, like fractures,
He
not
wasn't
reality
Walter
itself,
Harlan.
not running.
He wasn't
Armin stepped
Pastor
back,
Rusk.
moving in a way that
What did
ignored
he was
normal
unknown.
motion. Heine
A
whispered.
soldier.
Distance too Armin's
quickly.
voice was
And
low.
yet,
Claire sprinted down,
Glass
supposed to
ran
leave.
facial
Her boots
recognition,
pounding
cracked
against
old
breast.
DMV and
Fast
security
breath
archives.
shops. The door began
One
to
hit
shake.
came up.
Focus. The shadows inside.
Reverend
She didn't
Paul
look
Myers.
back. Didn't
Reaching
need
a
to.
former pastor
Trying
of a
to feel
Pentecostal
them.
branch,
The
shut
right
down
behind
in
her.
1994.
The town
Angry
blurred
after
as she ran.
suspected
You don't
tax
belong.
fraud.
Houses passing.
He had
Armin
vanished.
grabbed
Windows
Heine's
filled
hand.
with more
Never
figures.
arrested. We need to move.
Watching. Never found.
Always
Where?
watching. She cried.
Until
Every
now.
direction. Armin
Watching.
looked around. Blocked.
The hunt
But there was
begins.
nowhere
Every
to go.
Leading
Nothing
the
to run
FBI
toward.
joined
No,
the
nothing
investigation
to run
in early
from. They're hurting. Just the
2026.
void. Just
They
like the
dubbed it
house.
Operation
The ground
Just
beneath
Like
the
Fire.
shifted.
Targeting
Always
the
guiding.
suspected underground
Never
location
chasing blindly.
network.
The door collapsed,
Disguised
slowed
as
slightly. The
spiritual
whole way
center.
inside. Her mind
Inside.
shifting gears. Exploding out. Running
Glass
wouldn't
was
work.
appointed
Merging with the
special
void. Never
consultant.
had. The system. She needed
Lilly
to break,
gave
rebuild
permission
again.
to share portions
Reforming.
of her
Stopped.
story for
Around
the
suddenly.
nationwide campaign.
And then everything
figures
was rushed
rushed
toward her.
conference.
Again, then halted
Glass
in
spoke
reality.
with a
Didn't
trembling
return
voice.
too
Too
precisely.
We
Too
thought
never
this
did
case
anymore.
ended at the
Wait,
Harlan
came back
house.
in fragments. Claire raised
We
her
were wrong.
hands. Sound
Slowly.
first.
It didn't
Not
end
in
there.
surrender.
It
Then
began
control.
there.
Pressure.
You
You don't want
A
me to
candle
something
for Rosie,
squeezing
she
his
said.
chest from the
Back
inside.
in Kalamazoo,
And finally,
people left candles along the
a ripple
fence line
flickering
where the
through
Harlan
them.
house
Broken,
once
subtle.
stood.
Armin
But
opened his
real.
eyes.
Children
Claire
wrote
stepped
Rosie
forward back
letters.
toward
But
it
one
wasn't
note
the same
written
because
with
I
a
went
child's
further.
crayon
Couldn't be.
read,
Another
Because
now.
Dear Rosie,
He understood it.
I
I
wish
saw
you
what's
were
still
Easter.
stretched
She
endlessly.
continued. Thank
The
you for
numbers still
saving Lily.
repeated. The
Thank
silent
you for being
217,
brave.
heavy, but the
I love
elusive
you.
was gone. You're not finished. Armin could
Glass
see
read
it
it
clearly
and
now.
tucked it
Just
into her
early
note
walls
versions.
weren't solid. Robert,
Some
they
cases
shift forward
never leave
again,
you.
like they were made
Slower
of
this
something
time.
unstable, less certain, something
You
unfinished.
carry
We are
forever.
complete. The doors. Claire shook her head. They
No.
were anchors. You're still learning. Points holding the structure
And that
together.
means.
And the hallway. She leaned in slightly. The hallway wasn't a place. You can still fail. It was a mechanism. The street lights
Heine lay
flickered
beside
violently.
him.
Unconscious.
Unconscious.
Pressure surged. Her breathing
That
shallow.
presence.
Armin
From
shook
below.
her gently. Reacting
Heine.
again. This
No
time.
response.
Not calm.
He checked her pulse.
Not controlled.
Weak.
Agitated.
there.
Come
Claire
on.
felt it.
He muttered. Through the ground.
Her
eyes fluttered. Through the air. Then slowly. Through them. Opened. It didn't like She
this.
looked at him. You don't
But
control
something
it.
was wrong.
Claire said. Her expression.
Looking
at them. Distant. You're just part of
You
it.
saw it.
The
She
words
whispered.
hit harder than
Armin
anything
froze.
else. The
What?
entire group froze again.
Heine's
voice trembled. But this time, the others, not stable. A pause. Fragments. The copies. Small breaks in Armin's
posture.
jaw tightened. In movement. Yes. In synchronization. Heine looked away. Claire saw her
Then you
chance.
know.
They're not
Armin
you
didn't
anymore,
answer.
she said. Because he did
They're
just tools. Or at least a crack. He was starting not in the ground. The sound returned.
In them.
Samantha
Footsteps.
stepped back, but this time, just one step. They didn't echo. Robert's head snapped
They
slightly
overlapped.
to the side, like multiple
Like
sets,
conflicting signals.
moving at once. The loop was breaking. Armin stood slowly. Claire didn't hesitate.
She
And there
turned.
it was, and ran
figure.
again. Standing
time,
at the far end of the
they didn't
hallway.
follow immediately.
But different now. There was a delay.
Clearer.
A hesitation.
More defined.
And that
somehow,
hesitation, familiar, was everything. It stepped
Claire
Claire sprinted toward
The
the
lights
edge of
flickered.
town.
The
Toward
hallway
the road.
paused.
Toward
doors
anything
rattled
that
softly.
wasn't this place. Heine grabbed
But
Armin's
deep
arm.
down,
Don't
she
let it
already
touch
knew.
you.
She
There was
whispered.
no edge. Armin didn't
Because the
respond.
moment she looked back,
Because he couldn't even
look
just
away.
for a second. The closer it
She
got,
saw it.
the clearer
Far
it
behind
became.
her.
Rising
Its shape
above the
stopped
town.
shifting.
Not
Its
fully
face
visible.
stopped
But
there.
distorted. melting, watching, and then growing. Armin saw it, and she understood. Not a monster, final, not a something shadow, irreversible, not something unknown. This wasn't about escaping himself anymore. It was about stopping it. No, before it finished Armin's becoming breath everything. Because standing in front of running until the town was his own reflection behind her. But not quite. Not the unnatural the eyes were on distance, empty. The kind that comes when something is no longer directly watching. The figure tilted its head, not only watching, mirroring him perfectly. She slowed near the outskirts, its smile bending forward, a slow, hands on her knees, unnatural, forcing her knowing smile steady. You understand. The road stretched ahead into darkness. The voice wasn't leading away from Millhaven, but it filled his mind. For a moment, cold, just one moment, absolute. She considered leaving. Armin's thoughts raced. Getting in her car. No, driving, but the truth, never coming back, was already there. But the thought died quickly. This place, she knew, he said slowly, it wouldn't end here. It doesn't just
Whatever
take
this
people.
was.
It wasn't
The figure
contained.
stepped
Closer. It was learning how not to be. It replaces Claire
them.
straightened. Heine shook her head on the journal she had taken from below. That's not. If there's a beginning, but Armin raised to herself. There's a way to stop it. Because now, in beginnings, everything made always sense. Leave traces. The system. She turned back toward the town. The rule, not toward the streets. One must stay. Not toward the figure the wasn't the thing controlling toward the oldest part of it. It was the result. The place no one talked about. Every time someone crosses, it sat on a hill just beyond the residential blocks. They don't disappear. Partially hidden by overgrown trees and rusted fencing. The figure smiled past it when she first arrived, barely noticing. Heine's grip tightened. But now it happens to the others. Because it felt like the figure turned its head like something would begin. Toward the doors. The doors were unlocked. Toward the endless rows of course they were. They inside, the air was thick with dust and age. One by one, pews stretched and inside, their surfaces worn smooth by decades, silent, maybe centuries, watching use. Armin felt stained glass windows were cracked, faded, stronger than before. Their colors barely not just physical, moonlight, mental. Claire moved like something was trying to overwrite him. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness. You're not me, and the whisper firmly. They were back. The figure stepped close, faint, now only inches away, but different from before. These weren't heart pounded. They were. What does that mean? She reached the altar. The figure raised its behind hand. It, slowly, small, reaching toward his almost hidden. You will Claire pushed it open. Armin grabbed a narrow staircase spiraled downward. Not like skin, ancient, not like anything alive. Of course, I'm not staying here. She descended. The figure's expression didn't change. The deeper she already did, the colder the hallway shifted violently. Not just temperature. The doors slammed. Presence. The lights flickered out. Another chamber. But unlike the basement beneath the house, this one was toward her. Far older. The walls were carved from stone. Her body covered in symbols, becoming transparent, similar to the one she had seen. He rushed toward her, but simpler. But his hand passed more primitive, like she wasn't fully there in the door. This is the exchange, carved from black stone. Armin turned back, etched with spiraling patterns that seemed to move. The figure tilted its head again. Claire stepped closer, her pulse steady now. Now it corrects. This is it. Heine's voice said quietly. I'm the first going back. She ran her hand along the carvings. No, you're not. Still, but she shook her head. Not alive. It's pulling not like the others. Her form was different. Like this was where it started. I think the journal in her hand shifted slightly. I was never supposed to. She opened it again. Armin flipping through the pages. Searching. He turned to the figure. An earlier entry. Stop it. One she hadn't noticed before. Didn't thought it was a place. You chose, but it was never Armin's mind raced. It was a door. There had to be a way. Claire looked up. There had to be something he missed. At the stone structure in front of her. A flaw. A door to what? Then. The answer came immediately. The doors, not from the journal. They weren't just anchors, not from the walls. They were connections. From behind it, each one, a faint sound, linked to a person, like something shifting, far beyond. And Claire stepped back, was still connected. Her instinct screaming. I don't need to replace you. But she held her ground. Said suddenly. If this is the first one, she whispered, for the first time, then everything else hesitate here. I just need to break your connection. The basement, the hallway trembled. The thing below, system, all of reacting again. Branches. Heine looked at extensions. What are you doing? Was the Armin met her eyes, and suddenly, trust me, everything made sense. He turned. It didn't create the town. Straight toward the nearest door. The house. The figure moved instantly, and they built faster than before. Around this, trying to stop to study it, but Armin was already there. Or maybe grabbed the handle to worship it and ripped the door. Claire's grip tightened inside, and something went wrong. Another version of Heine. A low hum filled the chamber. Silent. The carvings on the door flickered faintly and pulled her out. Reacting. The hallway knew she understood. The system. You're not supposed to be overloaded. She said. The figure screamed. You're not supposed to. The sound of pure distortion. The hum grew louder. Because now, the air vibrated. There were two. Claire stepped forward again. Two realities. Slow. Careful. No rule. If you adore. What happens next? She raised everything. Hovering just inches from the surface. Again. Everything broke at once. Not the moment her fingers touched. Not in pieces. Everything changed. The whole chamber disappeared. Not a sound twisted, but a pressure folded in on itself. A force that crushed and suddenly from every direction. Claire was somewhere else. The walls split open. Not physically. The doors ripped complete from their frames. Darkness. Reality. Endless. Unraveling. And within it, Armin hit the ground hard. Not forms. The air knocked out of him. Not bodies. Heine's voice echoed somewhere. Shifting. Watching. And then distance didn't exist anymore. Not as everything was folding in on itself. Not as a body. Like as awareness. Was trying to erase the mistake. A wave of something. Too original. Not emotion. That wasn't allowed. Not thought. Armin pushed himself up. Claire's mind struggled to hold itself. The one he pulled from the door. To stay intact. Motionless nearby. To remain hers. The other Heine. You don't belong here. The one who came with him, he said, was flickering. Her voice felt distant. Glitching. Small. Like a signal being torn apart. The response came instantly. Which one? Not in words. He whispered. But meaning. But the question didn't matter anymore. Because the system didn't care. crush it. They were both errors. Claire forced herself to stand. But to focus, it was unstable. To hold on to something real. Its form shifting. You're not supposed to be here. Faces flashing across its surface. You were contained. Dozens. You were controlled. All the people who had stayed. Then, all the ones who became it. Claire's voice came out fractured. We. You. The darkness shifted. Everything expanding. Armand revealing more. No, not one presence. I fixed it. Layered. The figure lunged. Connected. But the floor collapsed beneath it. Claire's heart pounded. Swallowing half its form. This isn't just one thing. It screamed again. The realization hit hard. Inhuman. Too big. The hallway was no longer stable. And then, it wasn't even a hallway. She understood the truth. Just Millhaven wasn't the beginning. Floating pieces of something that used to make the first successful doors hung in empty space. Now, they were some spinning slowly. Claire staggered. Some breaking apart. Her mind cracking under the weight of it. A life. No. A version. She whispered. A trapped existence. Don't get to spread. Armand darkness pulsed. Both of them now. One on the ground. Claire froze. One barely holding together. Looked. Listen to me. The word hit her like a shock. The standing Heine looked at him. Every choice. Fear in her fading eyes. Every step deeper. What do we do? She had followed it. Armand didn't answer immediately. And now, it had learned her. He understood everything. Room number 6 back into the chamber. It wasn't even a room. Shaking. It was a rule. The stone door stood in front of her. A mechanism that maintained itself. Still. By replacing. She knew. By copying. This wasn't something she could just One enters. Because it wasn't just open. One stayed. It was already spread. Always balanced. And she, until now, was part of it now. You can't both go back. Claire didn't move for a long quietly. Not because she fell. But because, for the second time since arriving in Millhaven, alive, she understood the full weight of what she was facing. Armand wasn't a creature. Between them. It wasn't even a single entity. Calculated. It was a system. There was only one way. The system needs a constant. Expanded. Adapted. And now shook her head. It had a foothold. No, don't. A door. He met her eyes. And it was already getting better at opening them. The collapsing world around the cold stone floor, violent back against the wall. Desperately, the journal trying to restore order hands. If we don't decide, fingers trembled. Armand continued. Not from fear alone. It will, but from clarity. And it won't care who it takes. You opened it. Silence. The words echoed again, even in the chaos. Over and over. Silence. She had dismissed them. Because they both understood. Refused to accept closer. But now, flickering again. Now she couldn't ignore it. You saved me because it was true. Armand shook his head. But enough. Not yet. Every step figure rose again behind them. Every question she had asked, twisted. Every secret she had uncovered. Still trying to fed into the same thing. Still trying, understanding, to reclaim its place. And that was exactly what it needed. Cannot. Claire looked up at the door again. Armand silent. And for the first time, but not inactive. He wasn't afraid. Never inactive. You're not the system. You don't force your way through. You're just what's left behind. You wait. The figure paused. You learn, confused, and then you let us do the work. Armand took a step toward no response. Then another. But she didn't need. If something has to stay, because she had already heard its answer. Then it lasted slowly. Her legs unsteady at first. Armand, but strengthening with each breath. But he didn't stop. If I opened it, because he had already decided. Then I can close around them began to. The words felt right. Pulling together. Not hopeful. Reforming something. Not optimistic. A structure. Certain. A shape. Because this wasn't about destroying it. Old. That wasn't possible. Familiar. Not anymore. Room number 6. Just Armand stood in front of it. She could contain it. The handle cold under his way it used to be. The same as before Millhaven. But now, before the door, he understood what it meant. Claire stepped toward the stone surface. A choice. This time, Heine without hesitation. You don't have to do this. Flickered faint, she said desperately. Reacting to her presence. There has to be another way. You said I opened it. Armand looked at her. So really tell me how it works. At the person who shouldn't have made it out. Then, but did. A faint vibration. Because of him. The same hum. That's exactly why I do. Claire closed her eyes. The world around them screamed louder, letting it cracks tearing through everything. And then, time. She understood, running out, not in words. Armand took a breath, not in instructions. Then, he opened the door. The door wasn't physical, endless, not really. But this time, it was a connection. He didn't hesitate. Between awareness, he stepped inside. Between minds, the moment he crossed, between perception and everything stopped. And once that connection existed, the noise, it couldn't simply be shut. Silence, because it wasn't open in one place. Absolute. It was open in her. Heine screamed. Claire's eyes snapped open, but it sounded distant. Oh, of course. Fading. That's why it had door closed behind him. And that's why it had recognized, stabilized. Because she wasn't just outside it anymore. The hallway was gone. She was part of the motel now. Gone. A node. The door. A doorway. Gone. Her chest tightened. Stood alone. Her breath in an empty street. No. Night air. She whispered. Cold. But the truth didn't change. The world. She had crossed the threshold. The second Heine. She carried it with her. Erased. Which meant, because only even if she destroyed this door, she turned even slowly. If she sealed this place, heart pounding, it wouldn't matter. Because it could still spread. No sign of the place. Claire no trace back. Of what happened. Her mind racing. Only one thing remained. Searching for something. Behind her. Anything. At the edge of the that street. That could stop this. A single door. There has to be a way. Standing alone. Old. There has to be. Worn. And then. Silent. She remembered something. 6. She stared at it, the floor she had exposed earlier, tears streaming silently down her face. Unpredictability. Because she knew. Choice. What it meant now. Not observation. What was inside. Not imitation. Not a monster. Creation. Not a trap. Claire froze. Armin. Her thoughts locking into place. Waiting. That's keeping the balance. If it learned by observing. Softly. If it spread by understanding, like something inside, then the only way to stop had shifted was to break the pattern completely, shaking her head. Something it couldn't predict. No, she whispered. Couldn't process because she understood something that didn't follow logic. If she opened follow survival, he might not be the one who comes out to the journal and the system. Then back to the door. So she turned. A terrible realization formed, leaving room number 6 behind. It's not about closing the door. Closed. A voice barely audible now. Inside. It's about the endless connection. Armin stood. A long silence. No hallway. Because she knew what that meant. No voices. She didn't want to say just him. Didn't want to accept it. Until there was no other sound. If I'm the doorway, distant, a grip tightened. From the other side. White. Armin then I have to be the one that closed. The only thing that existed. The chamber seemed to react, and slowly the air tightened. He smiled. The cabin's pulsing faintly. He understood, not stopping. He wasn't trapped, not encouraging. He was the system, just observing, learning. Claire took a slow breath. Steady, controlled. This is what you didn't account for, she said, her voice stronger now. You think everything follows patterns. You think everything wants to survive. She stepped closer to the door, right up to its surface. But you don't understand choice. Her hand pressed flat against the stone. And you don't understand sacrifice. The hum intensified, the presence stirring again. This time, it felt different. Alert, concerned, good. Claire closed her eyes. I'm not your doorway anymore. And then, she made her choice. Not hesitation, not doubt, just action. The connection surged, the darkness rushing in again, trying to expand, to anchor. But Claire didn't resist. She let it take hold, just for a moment. And then, she did something it couldn't understand. She let go, not physically, mentally, completely, of fear, of identity, of self. The connection collapsed, not gradually, instantly, like a bridge disappearing mid-crossing. The presence recoiled, violently. The chamber shook, the carvings shattered, the door cracked, splitting down the center. Claire felt herself falling, not backward, inward, everything dissolving, everything ending. And for a brief moment, there was silence, true silence. Then, darkness, silence, not the unnatural silence Claire had felt before, not the heavy, watching stillness that pressed against her skin and whispered from the walls. This silence was different. It was empty, completely empty. Morning light stretched across Millhaven, soft, golden, normal. Birds chirped, wind moved gently through the trees. A dog backed somewhere in the distance. Life, real life. The town looked untouched. No broken windows, no frozen figures, no signs of the impossible. If someone had driven through at that moment, they would have seen nothing wrong, nothing unusual, nothing to suggest that anything had ever happened. Except, for one thing, Claire's car still sat at the edge of town, parked crookedly on the side of the road, driver's door slightly open. Inside, a bag, her notes, the empty space where the journal used to be. But no Claire. 2 hours later, a police cruiser rolled slowly into Millhaven. Dust trailing behind it, Sheriff Daniel Reeves stepped out. Mid-40s, calm, experienced. He had been called in after a report of an abandoned vehicle. No driver, no sign of where they had gone. At first, he expected something simple, a breakdown, a missing person. But the moment he stepped into the town, something felt off. Not wrong, not dangerous, just unsettling, like walking into a room where a conversation had just ended, and no one would tell you what it was about. Reeves moved through the streets slowly, observing, taking mental notes. People waved, smiled, acted normal, too normal. He stopped near the center of town, stepped out of the car again, watched, listened. Everything looked right, everything sounded right, but something was missing. He couldn't explain it, couldn't define it, but it lingered, like a word on the tip of his tongue. Reeves shook it off, pulled out his notebook, started asking questions. Anyone seen this car before? A few people glanced at it, shrugged. No, one of them said. Must have just shown up. Reeves frowned slightly. That's odd. But they didn't seem concerned. Not curious. Just indifferent. He moved on. The church was next. Something about it drew his attention. Not obviously. Not strongly. Just enough. The doors creaked as he stepped inside. Dust floated in the light. Everything exactly as it should be. Except the door behind the altar. Slightly open. Reeves approached slowly. Instinct sharpening. He pushed it wider. Looked down the staircase. Hello. No response. He descended carefully. Hand resting near his holster. The air grew colder. Heavier. At the bottom. He stopped. The chamber was there. Stone walls. Ancient carvings. But the door was gone. In its place, a fractured wall. Cracked. Broken. Like something had been there. And wasn't anymore. Reeves stepped closer. Examined the stone. Ran his fingers along the surface. Cold. Ordinary. Nothing unusual. And yet, he felt it again. That same sensation. Something missing. What the hell happened here? He muttered. No answer. He turned to leave. And paused. For just a second. He thought he heard something. A whisper. Faint. Close. Reeves froze. Looked back at the wall. Nothing. Silence. He shook his head. Just the wind. And walked away. By the time he returned to the surface, the feeling had faded. The town felt normal again. Whatever had been wrong was gone. Days passed. Then weeks. The abandoned car was towed. The case filed. Eventually forgotten. Millhaven continued on. Quiet. Unremarkable. Just another small town. But sometimes, late at night, when the streets were empty, and the world was still, something lingered. Not watching. Not waiting. Just present. A memory of something that had almost happened. Or maybe, something that still could. Far away. Beyond the town. Beyond the roads. Beyond anything people would ever notice. A single thought stirred. Not complete. Not aware. But not gone. Because doors, once opened, are never truly closed. They just wait. And somewhere, deep in the quiet spaces between thoughts, a voice, faint and distant, whispered, "We remember you." And for the briefest moment, in the reflection of a passing window, a face appeared. Not quite human. Not quite gone. Watching.
Hey there. Welcome to Midnight Sleep Crime. I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know many of you use this video to fall asleep, so before you get too cozy, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to hear from you. Story 1. A remodeling crew in Michigan was tearing up a 19th century farmhouse floor when they found a trapdoor. What was inside led to a statewide investigation, 5 exhumations, and the unmasking of a killer who had hidden in plain sight for over 40 years. In 2023, contractor Luis Romero and his crew begin renovations on an old farmhouse outside Kalamazoo. While removing the rotted living room floor, they discover a hidden trapdoor sealed shut with bolts and concrete. Inside is a narrow staircase that leads to a fully preserved 1970s children's bedroom, untouched, with toys, posters, and a bed still made. At first, the room seems like an eerie historical oddity, until they find human teeth in a jewelry box on the dresser. The case quickly unravels decades of secrets tied to the house's original owners, the Harlan family. The youngest daughter, Rosie Harlan, had gone missing in 1981 at the age of 9, but police had no evidence, and the family claimed she'd run away. Over the years, multiple foster children placed in the home also disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances, yet the case files were scattered and never connected. The discovery leads to a massive forensic effort that uncovers 5 victims. But the biggest shock comes when a now elderly man, a retired police detective who originally cleared the Harlans, is exposed as being part of the cover-up. His connection to the Harlans runs deeper than anyone imagined. The twist? The preserved bedroom was never meant to be found. It was built as a memorial by someone with a conscience, someone who left behind a final letter explaining everything. Kalamazoo, Michigan, May 3rd, 2023. Luis Romero wasn't one for superstition. He'd torn up enough old floors and walls over the years to know that sometimes creaking noises and cold spots were just bad insulation and worse plumbing. But this house felt different. The job was simple enough. Restore a dilapidated 1880s farmhouse for a young couple planning to turn it into a countryside Airbnb. The property had been vacant for decades, passed down through inheritance, rarely touched. A minor fixer-upper, they said, until Romero's crew pulled up the floorboards in the main room. It was Luis's apprentice, Kenny, who first found the edge of it, a steel-reinforced trapdoor, completely sealed with old cement and rusted bolts. "Hey, boss," Kenny called, tapping his crowbar against the edge. "You see this?" Luis knelt down, running his hand across the surface. It was flush with the joists, expertly disguised. He followed the bolts with his eyes. Someone had gone to great lengths to make sure this door stayed shut. "Get the grinder," Luis muttered. "We're opening it." The trapdoor. The air changed the moment they cracked the seal. A musty, cold draft crept out from below. Kenny leaned in with a flashlight and frowned. "It's stairs," he said. "Leads down, but it's weird. Looks like finished walls." The hole opened into a narrow stairwell, perfectly preserved. As they descended, it felt less like a basement and more like a capsule from another time. At the bottom was a small door with floral wallpaper peeling at the edges. Behind it, a room no larger than 10 by 10 feet. A pink bed with ruffled sheets sat perfectly made. A small dresser, toy chest, and bookshelf lined the walls. Movie posters from the 1970s, The Rescuers, Star Wars, Pete's Dragon, were pinned up like someone had just been there. Dust lay everywhere, but nothing had been disturbed. A dollhouse sat open on the floor. On the nightstand, a Mickey Mouse lamp flickered when Luis tried the switch. This doesn't make sense," Kenny whispered. Luis opened the closet. Inside were a row of tiny dresses, all neatly hung, and a shoebox. He opened it. Inside, nestled among yellowed hair ribbons and paper dolls, were 6 human teeth. The police were called immediately. Within hours, the farmhouse was roped off, and the county coroner arrived with 2 forensic techs. Detective Ellen Glass of the Kalamazoo Sheriff's Department took the lead. The first thing she noticed? The room wasn't built with the rest of the house. The walls were newer, the construction modern. It had been created within the house and expertly hidden. "What we have," she said during the initial press briefing, "is a crime scene that may date back over 4 decades. We believe this was a concealed living space, and there is strong indication that a child lived here for some time." But what shocked her most wasn't the room. It was the house's history. The property had belonged to the Harlan family until 1997, when the last surviving member, Anne Harlan, was placed in hospice care. The Harlans had 4 children, but only 3 remained in the public record after 1981. The youngest, Rosie Harlan, had been listed as a runaway at age 9. The official report was thin. No signs of foul play, no autopsy, no evidence. But now, a child's room was buried beneath the house, one that no one had known existed. A room designed to be locked, forgotten. The survivor. 3 days later, the story broke statewide. Images of the hidden room appeared across news channels, the headline reading, "Secret Child's Room Found Beneath 19th Century Farmhouse in Kalamazoo." That's when the phone call came. Detective Glass picked up on the 3rd ring. "This is Ellen," she said. The voice on the other end was shaky, elderly, a man. "I know that house," he said. "I lived next door until 84. My name is Martin Blanchard. I remember Rosie." Ellen's ears perked up. "You were neighbors with the Harlans?" "Yeah," he said. "And I remember things. Screaming, mostly. And once she threw a note over the fence. I was just a teenager. I didn't do anything." "What did the note say?" There was silence for a moment. She wrote, "I'm not allowed to leave, but I'm still here. Please tell someone. My name is Rosie." A pattern emerges. The cold case unit began a full reinvestigation of Rosie's disappearance. While combing through the original police files, Detective Glass found inconsistencies, officers' notes missing, evidence never processed, and one name stood out. Detective Charles Lenning, the lead investigator at the time, had signed off on Rosie's case within 48 hours, an unusually short window for a child disappearance. He had since retired, now living 2 counties over. Glass made contact. "What do you remember about Rosie Harlan?" she asked. "Runaway," Lenning said flatly. "No sign of abduction. Parents said she'd been troubled. Case was closed. No foul play." "You didn't find it odd that a 9-year-old could disappear without a trace?" "I followed protocol. If you're calling me 40 years later, then maybe your department's got time to waste. I don't." Click. Something wasn't right. The dollhouse back at the scene, forensic teams began inventorying the room. Beneath the bed was a crawl space sealed with plywood. Inside, they discovered a small metal lockbox. Inside the lockbox was a set of photographs, Polaroids, curled at the edges, showing a young girl with red hair in various poses. Some showed her smiling, others crying. But the final photo chilled the entire team. It was of Rosie standing beside the dollhouse, holding up a sign written in crayon, "This is not my home." On the roof of the dollhouse, forensic techs noticed something strange. Carved into the shingles with a blade were 7 sets of initials. Only one matched someone they knew. R.H., Rosie Harlan. The rest? Unknown. The room had become a forensic goldmine and a nightmare. Detective Ellen Glass stared at the dollhouse on the evidence table. Each carved set of initials was cataloged and magnified. 7 sets. One belonged to Rosie Harlan. The others? No mention of them in any Harlan family records. Glass felt a pit form in her stomach. Assume the worst, she muttered. 7 sets of initials. 7 kids. Desai nodded grimly. If we're lucky, initials alone won't be all we have for long. Digging the records, Detective Glass requested all missing persons reports for children under 12 between 1975 and 1985 in Kalamazoo County and surrounding areas. The list was longer than she expected, and many had gone cold with only vague leads. She assigned her team to begin cross-referencing the initials with these files.